automate, Mr. Speaker, the records management unit beginning in the Ministry of the Public Service as a pilot. And funding has been requested to purchase scanners specifically for capturing information in files and documents and transferring them into a computer system known as the FileNet system. As soon as these scanners are in, training will commence for the staff in the registry. Mr. Speaker, to bridge the skill gap among existing registry staff and address the dire shortage of staff in this area, my ministry has budgeted to re-employ an expert registry professional to train a cadre of registry records management clerks selected from among existing public officers. In addition, we will conduct training for persons as potential registry supervisors. And it is expected that at the end of the project, each ministry, Mr. Speaker, would have at least 2 supervisors and trained complement of fully trained records management clerks. Mr. Speaker, creating an electronic registry is so important. I can tell you, if you ever went down any of these registries, you see files all over the place, and most times it's inadvertent, but of course, with a manual system, people just tend to arrest the files all over the place. And if you happen to cross somebody in the wrong area, then of course, when it's time for your file to be found, nobody can find it. And maybe 2 or 3 years later, it may reappear. And so us creating an electronic registry is essential to efficiency in the system and to make sure that people are treated fairly. Many times individuals can't be promoted, transferred, upgraded, because you can't find their files. The files are there, you're just not able to find it. But once you are able to have an electronic copy of these files, of course, it's accessible to all those, and it's more difficult for the system to be manipulated. Mr. Speaker, we plan to decentralize some of the training functions of the Ministry of the Public Service to the various ministries. Each ministry, Mr. Speaker, will be required to identify 1 technical and/or administrative officer with requisite training, credential, or a willingness to obtain the qualifications to lead their respective training and human resources development units. And based on their assessed needs, ministries will be expected as of July of 2013 to host any number of courses for the benefit of their personnel. And it is expected that the establishment of the functioning training unit in every ministry will not only reduce the money spent on training, Mr. Speaker, but also enhance the ability of ministries to measure effectiveness of training. Mr. Speaker, unlike the private sector, the government does not have the luxury of recruiting only those persons with required skills. There are literally hundreds of public officers who require upgrading. The training center has conducted upgrading in office procedures, English, mathematics, Microsoft Word, and other basic courses with encouraging results, Mr. Speaker. However, during the 2013-2014 budget year, funding has been requested to outsource this training to a local college so that the officers who participate will get consistency, stability, and a more focused curriculum. Mr. Speaker, the Public Service Center for Human Resources Development will select successful candidates from the upgrading program to offer further training in a secretarial course specifically designed, Mr. Speaker, for the public service. This will help to fulfill the request from many ministries for additional secretarial staff. The young people of any country are its future. Just the same, the future, Mr. Speaker, of the public service is in the thousands of young people employed in the various government agencies. Therefore, my ministry has embarked on a mission to ensure that the young public servants of the day understand the legacy of the past 40 years. And we are determined to ensure that they are actively involved and competent to fulfill today's mandate. And we are determined that they become equipped to lead the public service of tomorrow. In this regard, my ministry has turned the spotlight, Mr. Speaker, on the estimated 70 administrative cadets employed throughout the public service. These, Mr. Speaker, are officers who have entered the public service with at least a bachelor's degree or have earned a bachelor's degree after joining the service and are posted on the first rung of the ladder leading to the top positions in the public service. Mr. Speaker, there are scheduled assessments for would-be public service administrators and top management. However, there is no structured administrative management development program in place. And as a result, they are left to find their way through the administrative maze by whatever means possible. And Mr. Speaker, many rise to the ranks of directors and other senior technical positions without having a clear understanding of administrative policies and procedures in the public service. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, my ministry has begun to develop a structured development program to ensure that the administrative cadets are adequately trained and properly socialized in the public service. We've identified 70 cadets with the help of the Department of Information Technology, activated an electronic communications network, and set up a committee to develop a professional development and training program for administrative cadets, Mr. Speaker. And so, as you can see, Mr. Speaker, we are trying to see how we can concentrate more on training. And in addition to the training programs that we are initiating, we'll also be conducting a random survey throughout the public service, equally surveying all of the ministries, asking for feedback from individuals, helping us to determine the types of trainings that individuals feel is required and necessary in the service. Mr. Speaker, moving forward, the program will be expanded to include entry-level technical office, teachers, maintenance personnel, social workers, entry-level nurses, engineers, doctors, and lawyers. Mr. Speaker, we are determined to shift the paradigm and begin to nurture the talent, energy, and fresh innovations of the youth in the public service. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that this is an essential plank in the bridge to the future, not just for the public service, but, Mr. Speaker, for the entire country. We can do this because I believe in the Bahamas, and above all, we believe in Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, a comprehensive review of the compensation practice in the public service undertaken by a consultancy from February of 2006 to December of 2007. And as recommended in the report, the Ministry of Public Service has established a compensation unit with responsibility for the control of job creation, including job descriptions, job evaluation, salary administration, and maintenance of job evaluation programs, database of over 800 jobs. In addition, as recommended, a full-time officer, Mr. Speaker, at the level of First Assistant Secretary has been deployed to lead the unit. And funding from the current budget will be utilized to train 5 job analysts, 5 assistants, and 3 clerical support staff, and 1 information technology person. Mr. Speaker, my ministry has commenced the process of conducting a staff audit, and this is important. We have made a request to every agent of the government to submit an organizational chart to the Ministry of the Public Service depicting all positions as well as all vacancies. In the new budget year, my ministry has requested funding for a short-term consultancy to complete the staff audit process. The compensation initiative, together with the staff audit, is expected to inform decisions regarding hiring practices, wage, salary allocations, succession planning, and promotions, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is very important because we want a well-structured organization where once all the positions are filled, then you would know what's required in order to hire somebody else instead of a ministry just deciding at any arbitrary time that they want to hire individuals. We'll know all the positions that exist in the ministry, and once they want to move away from that structure, it will require Cabinet's approval to move away from that structure. Mr. Speaker, social promotion. Public service has become a place where many expect automatic promotions based on years of service and achieving additional qualifications. Going forward, this practice, which breeds a sense of entitlement, will more than likely cease, and vacancies will be advertised, allowing persons that will to apply affording a greater transparency and opportunity to apply. Mr. Speaker, this is important because unless you can have a structured organization, every time an individual acquires additional qualification, they feel a sense of entitlement for promotion. And in fact, there's no requirement to have somebody at that level. And so I think they met with the commission and the permanent secretaries, it was last week or week before last, and they're recommending a structure where you would minimize this social promotion and you will have promotions based on a need for a particular level in a particular ministry. Mr. Speaker, strengthening of human resources units. A major thrust of this administration is to bring public service into the 21st century. And in this regard, strengthening of human resources units within government agencies and departments, Mr. Speaker, is essential.
Yes, revolution comes.
There's so much work to be done with respect to the organization management, succession planning, research, policy planning, and establishment of evidence-based monitoring and evaluation systems. According to numbers collected from my ministry, there are hundreds of workers in the public service waiting to be confirmed. These include contractual, casual, and temporary contractual workers, many who have been engaged in public service for decades, waiting to be regularized and or reassessed. Special issues such as interdiction are also under review, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I asked them the other day to please provide me with a list of all individuals who have been interdicted over the years. And Mr. Speaker, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, just based on the preliminary information, we have over 70 individuals, right, interdicted, some for as long as 10 years, receiving half pay, right, and just lost in the system. You know, these are persons who would have been charged before the courts, persons who, some instance, were charged, convicted, served their time, and just still interdicted. We had instances, Mr. Speaker, where an individual was charged, convicted, served their time, and came back on the job and never came off the payroll. Never came off the payroll. While the person was in jail, they were being paid. So they were charged, convicted, sentenced, served their time, and they're still on the payroll. Of course, we're dealing with that, Mr. Speaker, but the point is the person was able to go through all that, and it was just recently we picked up that the person had served time already, and the salary was never cut. And so, Mr. Speaker, we're looking at ways to try and minimize these things and getting all these persons. We're looking to put a system in place where we can minimize the amount of time persons can spend on interdiction. In order to achieve our objectives, my ministry has taken deliberate steps to strengthen the capacity of human resources units within the ministries and departments. In an effort to meet the many pressing demands, well-trained officers have been positioned to lead human resources units across the public service, and while others have been brought to the Ministry of Public Service. My ministry also has regular workshops to ensure human resources officers are kept up to date with policies to obtain their input on how to remedy obvious shortcomings in the shortest possible period. Now, Mr. Speaker, the rotation of the human resources, just recently we had an exercise where we rotated all of the human resources officers within the service. That is very important because in some instances you have some human resources officers in position for up to 10, 15 years. And of course, just to sort of give everybody a chance and allow the system to work properly, we decided that on a regular basis we would rotate the human resources officers, and we would look at other areas in the ministries as well, because it's not good for the service when you have one person serving in one capacity too long, because usually the position becomes what they want it to be instead of what the system says that it should be.
Revolution coming.
Mr. Speaker, we've embarked on a journey to ensure that the permanent secretaries and heads of departments has the support of knowledgeable and skilled human resources professionals, and leading HR officers not only have the capacity to lead their units, but also to mentor, coach subordinate officers assigned to their respective units. And this should result in a decrease in errors which cause unnecessary delays. Mr. Speaker, we are also looking at a new policy in conjunction with the Public Service Commission, where we've agreed, Mr. Speaker, we have in many instances individuals' ACRs have not been completed for 3, 4, and 5 years. It is disgraceful. And so persons can't be properly assessed. Persons who want to take FAS assessments and other assessments can't take it because the ACRs are not completed. Persons waiting to be promoted, they send recommendations to be promoted and don't send ACRs. And so the position now is that the leading person in the ministry will be held responsible if ACRs are not completed. And so right now you have individuals, ACRs not completed, and nobody's held accountable. But we are now looking at holding individuals accountable. So if you don't complete the ACR of your subordinates, then of course we are looking at withholding your increments, because it's wrong that individuals can receive their increments while not doing what they're supposed to. They have a whole list of persons under them who they're not providing ACRs. But while they're not providing their ACRs, they're not receiving increments. These individuals are receiving their increments. And so we have had an agreement already with the Public Service Commission that in cases where an individual refused to produce ACR, then their increments themselves would be withheld. Mr. Speaker, the post-independence era resulted in a public service which was involved in a single union. They had initially only the BPSU. Now we have a number of unions that represent public officers. We have the BPSU, Air Traffic Controllers Union, you have the Bahamas Union of Teachers, now you have the BIMSU, the Managerial Union of the BUT. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have the Customs and Immigrations Union, Mr. Speaker. And so we have now begun the process of negotiating with all of those unions. Some of them we've not gotten to the table yet, but we plan to get with them pretty soon so that we are able to...
Members, I can hardly hear the honourable member for...
We are able to get all of these industrial agreements out of the way. And so in the case of air traffic controllers, they decided because of the state of the economy, they wanted to defer their negotiations, so we're supposed to begin negotiations with them sometime in November of this year. In the case of BUT, and BIMSU, hopefully we could begin negotiations within the next couple of months. And we understand the unions are anxious to begin negotiations, but we have to get all of the requisite approvals, and we've taken a position where we are able to give everybody the same thing straight across the board. So once you work for the public service, we're going to standardize whatever benefits we give to all members so that they don't come back and say you gave better benefits to one grouping versus us coming back looking for more. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the expectations of our employees is that they would be provided a work environment that is conducive to productivity and the protection of their health and safety. At the same time, we are mandated to control expenditure. In regard to both of these obligations over the last year, we have methodically and deliberately set in place a new set of guiding principles, Mr. Speaker. This is when it comes to leasing government buildings, Mr. Speaker, leasing offices for government ministries and agencies. Mr. Speaker, I think I spoke to it before, where you have in some instances, you're paying as much as $59 per square foot. $59 per square foot, excluding camp charges for the rental of government space. Yeah. And so we have now, since coming to office last year, we have put a cap on it now, where the maximum we are paying to rent any building for the government is $25 per square foot, including camp charges.
That's what I thought, for you, man.
And so anybody who want to, Mr. Speaker, you imagine somebody charging the government $60 a square foot. They build a building, and in 3 years, they pay for the building. The idea is not to get anybody rich. We want to see how we can help a broad cross-section of those persons who own office accommodations. And so we have capped it now, where no matter where the building is, if you want to rent us, then you pay, the maximum you pay is $25 a square foot. Not only that, Mr. Speaker, in addition to paying some people or some companies up to $58, $59 a square foot, we also pay their real property tax. Right? And in some instances, we got to pay for parking. We have an instance now where one of the properties, they actually tow government vehicles off the premises. So they now have to park next door. And we're paying that one particular, that company, we're paying them $58 a square foot. And that is why it is very encouraging us to build as many government buildings as possible. Because if they're getting ridiculous with their lease fees, Mr. Speaker, we'll have no choice. And so, but the good thing is, Mr. Speaker, in the interim, Mr. Speaker, Rome is not built in a day. And so while we have taken on a policy of until we build a new government premises, then we have to rent from the private sector. Likewise here in New Providence, Mr. Speaker. And so we have identified 2 parcels of land on JFK, one where we intend to build a 100,000 square foot building for several of the government agencies, and another one we're building a replica building of the one now that I initially built for the Bahamas and August Corporation at the time that we were in last time, and this government has decided to give it to tourism. The tourism said they don't want it, so now it's going to be the Office of the Attorney General, Mr. Speaker. And so it won't be, of course, they're going to be changing some of the MEP specifications, because we realized they had a number of issues with the electrical and the mechanical, and so we'll be changing those specifications and building another building next door. Of course, we also had a huge issue of mold in buildings, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, believe it or not, the previous administration, when I said they should be begging for forgiveness, you know, Bahamas had promised to build Office of the Prime Minister for us. Some deal was worked out where they bought the old S.G. Hamrose building for, I think, some $14 million. Then we found out recently, Mr. Speaker, the building was contaminated with mold and asbestos. And so we had to spend literally, I told them, tons of money. I don't want to find a figure, tons of money. And the staff, and I can tell you, tons of money for mold remediation and getting rid of the asbestos. This is a building that the previous administration rushed ahead and purchased for $14+ million just before the last election. They wanted to help out somebody. somebody said it was to help the election finance. I tell them, no, that's not so. It wasn't election funding.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Long Island on a point of order.
You know, Mr. Speaker, I've sat and I've listened to the minister, and he talked about the portfolio and the various investments they've done at NIB, but I take exception to what he just said about the former S.G. Ambrose building. At the end of the day, while there was an agreement by Bahamas to reenact or rebuild the Sir Cecil Wallace Whitfield building, there was a cap on that. And we found out that what the money that was allocated for would not have been able to be reproduced. We found also this building was for sale, S.G. Ambrose, that we could have purchased at a savings. And it was not to do any favors to any particular individual, as is being imputed by the member for Golden Gates. Now, I will also go on to say, Mr. Speaker, that we have brand new buildings in government's inventory that is also infested with mold. So to make such a suggestion that because of that building, that was unique to that, I think it's totally wrong and inaccurate. The facts of the matter is that we have brand new buildings that have the very same problem.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Gates. If you'd like to comment, you can comment.
Everywhere. There's mold outside right now. There's mold in here right now. But the level of mold that makes it dangerous to be in a building is different. And so I agree, new buildings have mold, but not to the extent that that building had mold. It became dangerous for persons who have to occupy the building. And so this building had mold, I agree, outside. So all they do is they measure the difference of the level of mold between outside and inside, and they decide when it is dangerous to occupy a building with mold.
Allow him to finish his statement. Chair recognizes the honourable member for Long Island.
Very much.
Yeah.
We can use the Ministry of Education headquarters as a very real example of a relatively new building where the mold within that building was at such levels we had to evacuate the entire building. And so the reality, but the point is it has nothing to do with the age. And that's exactly the point I'm trying to make, Mr. Speaker. And so the point that the Minister for National Insurance is making is totally irrelevant, erroneous, and misleading. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Gates. You can comment if you want.
For Long Island strengthened my position. They were also responsible for the construction of the education building. And the mechanical drawing that was approved initially, their ultimate maximum leader decided, no, we ain't going with that. And so the mold there was caused because of the imbalance in the air conditioning system.
Anyway,
and so we're not talking about how the mold was created. What I'm saying is that building, they literally spent millions of dollars. The government had to spend millions of dollars remediating mold in that education building. They were responsible for that. They were the ones. As a matter of fact, when I spoke to the director who works at the time, the director who works at the day suggested one thing, and the maximum leader said, no, this is what I want there. And that was my understanding of how the mold was created there.
Chair recognizes the honourable member for Long Island.
you know, we are advised, Mr. Deputy, that when we refer to individuals that either sit in this place or have sat in this place, they either have a name or a constituency to which they're referred to. I don't know who the member for Golden Gates is referring to as the maximum leader, but the reality is we all have leaders in our parties, and I would ask that much respect shown. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
I would ask you to just take note.
Mr. Speaker, if she don't know what I'm referring to, then we don't have no issue.
Very well.
Now, if she thought I was referring to a particular place, then we have an issue. But if she says she does not know, we have no issue. All I'm saying is the maximum leader decided that's what he wanted. And so the deal at this present Prime Minister's office, Mr. Speaker, was a bad deal. They said, listen to what they said. They said they got a deal. We're now spending all kind of money remediating mold and getting rid of asbestos. You believe it was a good deal, Mr. Speaker? It was not a good deal, Mr. Speaker.
It will come back
and so, Mr. Speaker, we are embarking on a program to get rid of the mold-infested building that they purchased, in addition to some of the other buildings like the Levy building where there's a massive problem with mold. We have already issued a purchase order for them to go and remediate the mold there. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we are looking at refurbishing all of the those government buildings with the mold problems. Mr. Speaker, as far as the new accommodations, we're looking at relocating the Ministry of Social Services, Fiscal Planning Department, and Consumer Affairs to the building on the corner of Bethel and JFK. We are looking at relocating the Department of Labor at the Summer Winds Plaza. We're looking at having the satellite office with Exchange and Department of Labor at the CBS building on Robinson Road. The Ministry of Labor and National Insurance is now located in Fort Nassau Hilton. I spoke about the good savings we're getting on that building, paying $30 a square foot, including electricity, Mr. Speaker. You know how expensive electricity is, Mr. Speaker. Urban renewal, we've relocated them to the Centerville House. We expanded space for housing and environment in Charlotte House. The Department of Agriculture, we are relocating them, Mr. Speaker, to the building on Gladstone Road as well. The Department of Social Services in Grand Bahama, we're giving them new accommodations. The National Training Agency, as I said before, we're putting them on the building on Gladstone Road and Munnings Road as well. And so as a part of our commitment in our charter for governments, we committed to providing good accommodations to the public service. Those are the ones who make the system work, Mr. Speaker, and it's only right that we should have them in good working conditions. Mr. Speaker, we are actively working to acquire decent and, or in some cases, expanded working environments for the following agencies. Department of Statistics, now in terrible accommodations. The General Post Office, we're looking at finding new accommodations for them. The Department of Road Traffic, we are trying to identify suitable space for them. The Department of Social Services, Department of Local Government, the Ministry of Health sub-offices, and the Ministry of the Public Service, we're looking at finding accommodations because we understand that Ministry and Department of Health need additional space on Meeting Street. Of course, the new buildings that we hope to occupy, that we will occupy during this budgetary session, will be the jail center on Lake Road. Of course, the two buildings I spoke about. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the Rodney Bain building has been abandoned for some time now, and we've gotten a technical report on that, and the report is that that building could be refurbished to a suitable state, and so we're looking at putting the family and the family court and one other court, the juvenile court, the family court and juvenile court. We're looking at refurbishing the Rodney Bain building and putting them aside there. Of course, the new building that we're looking at building on JFK will be 100,000 square feet, and we're looking at several ministries occupying that building. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I wish to congratulate, Mr. Speaker, the hard-working staff of the Ministry of the Public Service and the Public Service Commission, who dedicates tremendous hours to ensure the smooth running of the government agencies. As we speak, Mr. Speaker, they are processing 300 re-employments and over 150-plus confirmations and preparing for the opening of the 2013-2014 school year. Mr. Speaker, they work side by side with the Ministry of Agriculture and Local Government to regularize more than 150 local government employees. And I think the Minister of, the member for Michael spoke to that yesterday, where you had 150 persons who for years have been on local government payroll, and they have now all been made, on the process of being made permanent and pensionable and transferred to central government payroll. Mr. Speaker, I applaud the work of the small but effective accommodations unit and the pensions unit, which also manage insurance matters. My ministry, however, is looking forward to working with the Ministry of Finance to establish a fully staffed insurance management unit in the Ministry of Public Service during this fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, as you know, presently we spend almost $100 million on health insurance, almost $100 million. It's basically a self-funded plan. And so when you see that there's a reduction in the amount of money allocated, it's not because we're cutting out any of those persons who are now covered. It's the fact that once you finish rebalancing the plan, you see where you could create some savings, and you reduce the amount of money that you allocate to premiums. And so there's no indication we will be taking away coverage from anybody. It's only a matter of us rebalancing what presently exists and allocating the funds to more important areas. Mr. Speaker, the dedication of the staff of the Ministry of Public Service in New Providence and Grand Bahamas is reflective of the other public workers who are across the entire Bahamas. For this reason, the Ministry of the Public Service changed the practice of limiting the government house ceremony during the Public Service Week to retirees from New Providence. Mr. Speaker, where in the past only retirees from New Providence were taken to Government House and recognized for their years of service and their retirement. Of course, this year, for the first time in January, we invited all the retirees from the Family Islands, and we had a special ceremony in Government House to recognize their contribution to the public service as well, where they were honored by His Excellency Sir Arthur Folks and Lady Folks. And so never again will these retirees from the Family Islands be left out. We would always make sure that they get the same recognition as those persons in New Providence. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we applaud the decade of public service of the outstanding retirees of the Ministry of Public Service. I especially salute the contributions of Ms. Donella Bodie, Mr. Speaker, Ms. Donella Bodie, the former Permanent Secretary, and also a retiree, Ms. Rosetta Walker. the former registry supervisor. Godspeed to both of them, and I wish them well in their new endeavors. Mr. Speaker, finally, I'd like to thank my permanent secretary and a team, Ms. Elizabeth Caju in the Ministry of Public Service, and my permanent secretary in the Ministry of Labor and National Insurance, Mr. Mark Roll, along with his team, for the splendid job and support that they have given me since I was appointed as minister for those two ministries. Mr. Speaker, there's no doubt in my mind that we have the best person running this country at this time, charting a new course, making things happen. I think we don't need to convince the public. They were convinced last year. That's why they're over there and we over here. That they were doing a terrible job. And they wanted them out of sight. They didn't want them to have anything to do with the finances of the country. They said, put them aside, get them out quick. If you notice, Mr. Speaker, if you look across there, you see two persons who were ministers in the previous government. Two. They had a cabinet. They started off with a cabinet of about 20. I think two got fired, another one resigned, and because they had no confidence in their leader. And so they decided to, three got fired. Or three were cabinet ministers? Only two presidents now, sorry, only three. They had a cabinet of almost 20. In the last election, all were voted out except three. That should tell you something about them. This is the cabinet now. When we got voted out in 2007, we had about 90% of the cabinet ministers got re-elected. 90%. This time they had 90% of them voted out of office. And so if you look at them and you listen to what they're saying, you'll know that the Bahamian people could only be taking them as a big joke when they say they can't see how we could do what we say we're going to do. And based on their experience with their leader, I fully understand why they feel that way. If I had a leader like that, I would be skeptical of myself. Fortunately for me, I don't. I have a leader, Mr. Speaker, who proved himself between 2002 and 2007. He charted a course, created 22,000 jobs, and he will once again create stability for this country in which we live in. I support this bill, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Montague. Member Montague yields. Montague yields. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Bain and Grandstand.
I would like to move the following resolution. Resolved that the business of this House to continue beyond 7 p.m. Tuesday, the 11th June 2013.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. The following resolution be agreed that the business of this House suspends, that the business of this House continues beyond 7 p.m. this afternoon. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The resolution is agreed. The business of this House will continue beyond 7 p.m. Number 4, Montague. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the Montague constituency, and I offer them thanks each time for electing me to be their representative. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are so many issues which are facing this country today that you must ponder where do we start in trying to resolve some of the problems. We do, however, need a commitment from a strong government to determine the country's priorities. And unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, from my viewpoint and that of many of our citizens, the government cannot see the wood from the trees. Indeed, what are their priorities? You see, Mr. Speaker, the government came to power on a wave of promises. The aim was to get into power by whatever means possible. Promise the world, and the people will, in their desire to see an improvement in their lot, by most of them. Sure, we had heard them promise that they will be ready to govern from day one. And there is also this 100-day smorgasbord of treats, some of significance, but most required nothing more than the stroke of a pen. We will resolve the economic problems of this country, they indicated, and we will provide 10,000 jobs in our first year. The majority of the country, Mr. Speaker, is, to put it mildly, very disappointed with this government's performance to date. And one can understand why. Now, if they don't believe that, they just need to go outside of this House and talk to the people and answer their cell phones, and they will find out that this country is very disappointed. Crime is headed through the roof, and the government has the audacity to again promise 10,000 jobs. What happened to the first 10,000? I don't know where that promise remained. I heard the Prime Minister recently talk about 10,000 again. Now, I don't know whether he was referring to the first 10 or whether this was meant to be an additional 10. Instead of attempting to hoodwink the public by suggesting that unemployment is down 1 point here and another point there, it would be interesting to know how many of those 10,000 jobs that they promised have in fact been provided during the first 12 months of this government. And incidentally, Mr. Speaker, you're not creating a job by refusing to continue Going again?
Address the chair, Montague.
Glad to see you're remaining to hear this. You're not creating a job, Mr. Speaker, by refusing to renew the contract of an FNM supporter and replacing him with a PLP supporter and saying, oh, that's one job. How many actual jobs were created in this first year? I've heard no attempt to try and even suggest how many. I dare say it can't be more than 1,000.
If that.
That would be an exaggeration.
If that.
The manner in which several of the government's prior speakers are patting themselves on the back makes one wonder where they're living.
Yeah, where they living? In their ivory towers,
They're not living in this country. They don't go outside of these walls to find out what is happening in this country. They don't pick up a newspaper. They don't listen on the radio. Every morning, Mr. Speaker, I am concerned when I listen to the news. I wonder to myself, what mayhem has occurred overnight? How many people have been killed last night? What negative headlines will I see in the newspapers when I open them? This government is fiddling while Rome burns. Government is seeking to pat itself on the back for what they perceive are accomplishments during their first year, when they really, in fact, should be kicking themselves in the posterior for failing to deal with more pressing issues.
I like that.
Crime being just one of them, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Montague are nervous. I don't suggest they're any more nervous than the constituents in other constituencies. They're nervous to go out of their homes in the day. They're nervous because they're concerned that they may have someone approach them and snatch their handbag or rip some jewelry that they're wearing off their neck. Nervous that they'll come home to find that their house has been ransacked. Nervous that their car has been stolen. Wake up in the morning and find it gone. Or find it sitting on 4 blocks and every tire gone. And especially nervous, Mr. Speaker, that someone may, in the course of the night, break into their house and not only rob them, but assault them. That is the concern and the fear of this country. And yet, members opposite seem to carry on as if crime was not a problem in this country. Residents of Kemp Road want to leave the area. Montague residents who can afford it would like to move into a gated community.
Some say they're moving up on Eastern Road by Dodge Road. They say they know it's safe
Which
here.
is perceived as safe.
Right up there.
And in some cases, residents have expressed a desire even to leave this country. You're getting young people who are going abroad, getting educated. They don't want to return home. They don't want to come back here. What do they have to come for? They can't go out at night because they're going to be concerned that somebody's going to rob them or shoot them. Our neighborhoods are being destroyed, and this government continues to fiddle while Nassau burns.
Yes. Speak, Richard.
I made a call to this Parliament some weeks ago for the need to have a joint approach to the crime issue. And while my suggestion wasn't novel, I'm not claiming any particular credit for it, but I would have thought that I would not have to suggest to government the need for such an approach. Parliament must take the lead in this matter. And if the people have any faith in us, they will follow. Perhaps they don't have faith in us, and that's perhaps why this government is ignoring it. Everyone who has the best interest of this country at heart needs to participate. Because it's not only something that we can solve in here, we have to instill in the public the need and the desire to do this together. But if a government continues to sit on its posterior and like an ostrich stick its head in the sand, our country will continue to deteriorate, and when you finally decide to pull your head out of the sand, it will be too late. There'll be no tourist economy.
Ostriches have
There'll be no foreign investors.
so they could do that.
There'll be no
They do that
local
very
businesses if the criminals are allowed to threaten and undermine the feeling of safety and security in this country. The golden goose will have flown, and who knows if it'll ever return. So far, there's been no attempt that I am aware of to analyze the root cause of crime. And while the government has in its budget made provision for more police officers on the street and giving them more cars to carry out their duties, this only scratches the surface, as this only deals with the results, not the root cause of crime. And the root cause is what government needs to focus its attention on. I dare say that jobs, or a lack thereof, are a major component of the problem. Perhaps several members of government feel secure, surrounded by police officers and toting their own hardware.
Yeah.
But this is little comfort to the rest of us. Personally, I'm tired of seeing the pain in the eyes of persons in Montague constituency whose loved ones have been gunned down. It is small comfort to them that the perpetrator appears to have come from some other constituency. But this does not help their grief. I call on the government to wake up and deal with the real issues facing this country. Everyone born in this world has, in my view, a purpose in life, Mr. Speaker. And that is the hardest thing, though, to discover. The other day I attended a funeral of a young man gunned down in the Montague constituency. Someone who was too young to have determined what his purpose in life was. It was my wish that if nothing less, his purpose would be found in his death, in that it would prove to be the clarion call to our communities to take stock of what happened to him and do their utmost to ensure that no one else in their community would suffer that pain. Mr. Speaker, I would like to impress upon the honorable members of this House that we are in the middle of a national crisis. The crime situation in this country, and in particular New Providence, is out of control and has, over the last several weeks, escalated to a most serious level. Bahamians in all residential and business areas do not feel safe, and we must act now. Every minute of every hour that we sit here is being wasted. We cannot delay. We need to work night and day, if necessary, to put in place the appropriate measures to restore the public's confidence. This is a matter which can no longer be delayed. We must put aside our political differences to deal with this issue, as we're all Bahamians and have been charged with a mandate to govern this country, even if we are on this side, Mr. Speaker.
And they on that side.
This is, in reality, in my view, a state of emergency. And so I am asking all the members of this House to collaborate and to brainstorm in an emergency sitting, if necessary, to table, pass, and implement emergency national security and safety measures which in some way may address this crisis.
Yes.
I'm asking this government to ensure that there is adequate provision in this budget to pledge the necessary resources to facilitate what is required to restore the public's confidence. I appreciate that the issues underlying the criminal activity in this country are many and are affected by a multitude of social and economic conditions. But the senseless murders and the reprehensible violence cannot go unchecked without an urgent response by the police force. And as I indicated, I do not know how I can more strenuously emphasize that we cannot delay further. I do not want to cite to you statistics, and I do not at this time want to engage in a debate on the cause of crime in this country. But it is not, in my view, an understatement to say that we are under siege.
Yes.
What we are trying to accomplish as custodians of the obligations to govern this country is in grave jeopardy. Again, Mr. Speaker, I do not have all the solutions, but I am certain that with the collaboration of the members of this House, we can implement on an urgent basis measures which will speak loudly to those who are engaging in crime.
Yes.
That the government of the Bahamas has as its primary focus to bring to an end this antisocial and nefarious conduct. We must start with patrols with all available resources and in every neighborhood so that citizens can see the law enforcement officers in their communities. I was speaking with someone whose community in the United States had gone through a similar effort. And in that city, they were having enormous increase in crime. They brought in a police commissioner, or whatever they call them, and within a relatively short time, he dealt with the issue, brought down crime enormously. And the way that he did it was not by, when we have an incident in some constituency, sending police cars for a night or two, because unless they continue it, we would get back to the same situation. So he continued it, and in very short order, the matter was dealt with. But I don't know whether members agree, but I certainly think they should. They must understand the seriousness of this matter. I'm not just being some hysterical member of Parliament sitting here and mouthing off. I am saying something which all of us should feel.
That's true.
Outside of this country, they're looking in, and they're observing what's happening in this country. When we have tourist warnings, when we come to this country, what signal does that send? They're going to be concerned of coming to this country because they have issues of security. So it is not only an issue for us, it is an issue for anyone coming to this country.
It is.
I accept that there will be inconveniences and that some citizens may feel that they're being targeted or wrongly stopped. But they will understand that we are really in a state of emergency. And they know that the activities of the police are being conducted with the full endorsement of this House. We need to send a strong and clear message for those who are committing these crimes that they will be caught and they will pay for their criminal deeds. At this point, Mr. Speaker, I refrain from playing the blame game or even suggesting that the crisis of crime that we now find ourselves in is the fault of this government. We're in the middle of a national crisis, and it is imperative that we all participate in seeking a resolution. We cannot remain stationary, as government appears to be, and think that it'll go away. I urge the government to do something, and I, on behalf of this side, can assure the government that they will have our full support in seeking a resolution. Since being elected to Parliament, I have noticed with dismay attempts by the opposite side to rewrite history. Unfortunately, human memory is frail. And in order to ensure that persons listening to the parliamentary channel are not misinformed, I think it is imperative that some of these misstatements are corrected. Because if you constantly repeat an untruth, people will eventually believe it to be true. During the early days of the administration, the Prime Minister was reveling in his election victory. And it seemed to me to be a poor taste to correct him at that time, as he was still in the glow of victory. I recall, however, listening in amazement when the Prime Minister listed the projects which his government had been responsible for since 2002. It seemed as if the member for Centerville sought to take credit for every single major project carried out in the Bahamas since 2002. The list, however, became almost laughable when the Prime Minister included projects such as the airport, the National Stadium, the straw market, Bahamas projects as major projects of the PLP government.
Exactly.
I think that the only projects that were not included, Mr. Speaker, were the dredging of the Nassau Harbor and the roadworks project. Although I have no doubt that when the roads are completed, the government will seek to take credit for that. If, however...
Member for Montague, kindly, the member yields. Members. The chair recognizes the right honorable member for Centerville.
Ordinarily, sir, I would listen and make my comments at the end, and obviously I will reply. But I think the members should know, and he was not in the House of Assembly to hear the then government try to claim that stadium. That stadium came from this head, from my mouth, to then President of China and Premier of China. That's where it came from. No, nothing else, nothing else. That's where it came from. The President of China acknowledged that on this recent trip, where journalists were in the room and everyone else. Yes. Okay. When I thanked him on behalf of the Bahamian people for it. The international airport, the international, listen to me, the international,
Members.
You can stand up when you want to stand up, but the international airport is a PLP government affair.
No question about that.
Right? I sent these same two ministers were dispatched.
Members.
You know, and this is, and colleagues should know this. This is an important point in our political life.
Members.
The governing party at the time listen, Mr. Speaker, my government decided to review airport operations around the world.
They were reapers. They call themselves reapers.
These two ministers went out as a part of that review. We selected.
Members.
You should be ashamed of yourself to
Members.
a bold-faced lie.
Members.
Shame of yourself.
Members.
You should be ashamed of yourself. They say a bold-faced lie like that.
One thing you did then.
Not lie.
Point to one thing you did.
What you did? The bold-faced lie.
Your seats.
What you
You better all members take your seats.
Got it up there?
Members take your seats. Members take your seats. The House suspends. The House suspends. Sergeant, the House suspends immediately for 5 minutes. Sergeant.
Need a vacation? Need to get away but don't have the money to do it? Want to visit friends or family? Come in and talk to us about our special rate Commonwealth Bank quotation loans. Leave your worries behind. Let's make it happen. Bring Bahamian needs. We understand local lives and don't have to answer to anyone but our customers. Thank you, Commonwealth Bank. It's worth being up and coming. Basketball team, that's the under 16 boys. After 25 minutes, 16 points in the first half, able to make it a game in the second half, only to lose to Argentina 58-49, and their opening game of the Tournament of Americas and World Qualifiers in Uruguay today is your average anyway with 15, DeAndre Vilma at 11, Shamar Burris 9.6 points, and Fremont Gibson at 7 points and 10 boys. They will play Mexico tomorrow, supported by the powerful United States on Thursday. 35 athletes appear selected for induction into the Bahamas Sports Hall of Fame. Inductees in the class of 2013 come from a cross-section of Bahamas and athletes, coaches, administrators, officials, and the media. Selected from basketball, James Ford Palmer, Terry Walters, and the late Bernard Bunny O'Brien, from bodybuilding, Baldwin Darling, Henry Charlton, and the late Melanie Space. Powerlifting, Bernard Springfield, from baseball, Calvin Martin, boxing, Ellington Thompson, and the late Basil Hanna. Cricket, the late Alston Dusty Miller, cycling, George Curtis and Reginald Sass, golf, Carlton Harris and Ambrose Cutfield, soccer, broadcasting, Arthur Forrest, softball, Luciana Roach, Calvin Phillips, Brian Walker, and Lenny Newman. Swimming, Robbie Butler. From tennis, Olivia Markey and the late Steve Dillon. From American football, Cedric Sharkey Martin and Phil Brown. Track and field, Dudley Parker, Audrey Glybourne, and the late Nicole Mickey Johnson. Headline, Rugby, Joe Harris. Also from volleyball, Helena Cooper and Orion Rose. And from the sports media, all the Canada, brother from the north, well done, along with the late Weekville Rigby. This will be the induction ceremony on the Gala Show set for July 6th at the Regency Theater in Freeport. And the theme, Legends 2013, Better, Stronger, and Faster. Congratulations to all 35 of the inductees. The Providence Softball Association will be back on the diamond this evening with a doubleheader. They should be getting set to start. Signal Rockets against the Lady Killers, Black Scorpions, and the Signal Wildcats will play in the future. And for minor league baseball, Albert Cartwright and the Reading Phillies continue their search for the Harrisburg Senators, and for Richardson and the Rochester Red Wings play to be Toledo Monarchs. Are you ready for some international football? No, we are not talking soccer. You know, we had the Tottenham Hotspur and Jamaica Reggae Boys a few weeks ago. Well, a big deal is in the making with NC Moratorium on creating new bowl games ending after the season, and smaller conference finding themselves increasingly left out of discussion with the power leagues. The group of players is looking to across the country on the road for some new bowl hotels. According to Brett McMurphy of ESPN, the MAC, Sunbelt, Conference USA, American Athletic Conference, the New Big East, and the Mountain West are working to create more bowl games so that all the eligible teams have postseason round sports. And with the current bowls tied into deals with Quaker conferences, it's the Louisiana Tech of the world that get left out when the music starts. Limitations are the smaller conference concerning the 2014 bowl. The first thing has the details. Miami, Orlando, Little Rock, Arkansas, Boca Raton, Florida, Montgomery, Alabama, Los Angeles, Ireland, Dubai, Toronto, and yes, Nassau, Bahamas. We'll get ready for some college football starting in 2014 if all goes true to form. And it's game 3 of the NBA Finals tonight. The Miami Heat will go into San Antonio looking to get back the home court advantage with the San Antonio Spurs and their veteran Tim Duncan and Tony Parker and the greatest coach right now in the NBA Finals, Greg Popovich, looking to take a 2-1 lead. Tip-off time is 8 o'clock. Your guess is good as mine. And we're going to pick a winner tonight. Whoever comes in on top, I close to them. This is the sports on the evening right on Charles Bishop. Have a great evening. Tropical wave moving to the central and southeast Bahamas continues to create unsettled weather. Fall areas weather mountainous with a few showers and thunderstorms, partly cloudy tomorrow with scattered showers and thunderstorms. Small clouds should be alert for gusty winds and high seas and thunderstorms. Winds southeast to south at 10 to 15 knots in the northwest Bahamas and east to southeast at 15 knots in the central and southeast Bahamas. Seas 2 to 4 feet in the northwest Bahamas. The daytime high temperature 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That concludes a look at stories making news in the evening report. On behalf of technical producer Jamal Forbes, sportscaster Charles Fisher, and the entire ZNS News team, I'm Junita Swain. Good evening.
Evening once again. Moments like this call for leadership. And we come in this place and we call ourselves honorable. We bow and show obeisance to the chair and each other. And we have honorable before our names. And the last exchange certainly left much room for respect and for the civility and comity we expect in this place. So I am deeply disturbed by the actions I saw here tonight. And I have had an opportunity to speak to the House Leader and the Leader of Opposition Business, and I issued a warning to both And going forth, I shall not suspend the House. I should start to name persons, one by one. And so let this be the last time we experience such disrespect and dishonor in this place. The country doesn't need this at this time. I'm not going to preach, but I'll tell you, I'm not going to take this post as chair and speaker of this honorable House of Assembly and watch you grown men and women act like children. I'm not going to tolerate it. Let it be said on the record today. This is no game to me. I have high respect and regard for each of you. I expect that in return. So leaders, lead. And for the record, it had nothing to do with the member for Montague, who was on his feet giving a presentation. If there was a point of order, the chair recognized the right honorable member for Centerville. I'd like to continue from that point. The chair recognized the right honorable member for Centerville.
Much obliged, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the intention on rising was to indicate to the honorable member for Montague that he was factually incorrect with respect to the Lyndon Pinling International Airport and to the stadium. I thought it important to do so because it becomes a matter of political controversy when, in fact, in the view I was advancing, misstatements are made with respect to the authenticity of the claim. And that was what I was questioning. The member yielded. I'm grateful for his yielding in that regard. And Mr. Speaker, so that was the particular point I wanted to make, and the member was kind enough to allow me to say so.
Thank you, right honorable member. The chair recognized the member for Long Island.
And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for your fairness and handling of this particular matter. Mr. Speaker, I also stand on a point of order in refuting what the right honorable member for Centerville would have said. And the facts of the matter is this. While one may dream of things and talk of things until they actually happen and take place, Mr. Speaker, then they have not come to fruition. The only thing that happened to the Lyndon Pinling Airport under that administration was the slapping of a name on a new masthead out there. And of course, Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you that name was even put in before the international bodies were able to change it in their computers. For 2 years, Mr. Speaker, for 2 years, it was still being called the Nassau International Airport. And the stadium, Mr. Speaker, the stadium, Mr. Speaker, I am not done. All of the steel lay rotted out at the Thomas A. Robinson Stadium until we came to office in 2007. In 2007, when we began to mobilize the work out there. Thank you.
Member for Angleton stood on a point of order. The chair recognizes honorable member for Angleton.
I have corrected this. Certain members over there, one or two, have been perpetuating this falsehood about the fact that the name of the airport was not done properly, and because of that, it still carried the name of Nassau International. That is not correct. When the airport was renamed, it was the Lyndon Pinling International Airport. But as a coded airport, it is known as NAS. It's still known as NAS. It has nothing to do with any delay in any registration or anything of that nature. And LPIA was not, we were not able to use that. NAS is what was the identification of the airport. It continues to be the identification. Speaker, I'm going to be speaking next, and I will speak to the airport. But it is very sad that the side opposite would think that living Bahamians on this side would hold public office and can't do nothing, that they'd have to elect them, the member for Long Island, or one of the others over there, the few over there, to make something happen. My God, give us some credit, man. Be some real people over here and be doing some real things. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of information in regards to the National Stadium. Mr. Speaker, the delay in the National Stadium being constructed, or at least the start of it under the Progressive Liberal Party, really had nothing to do with the Progressive Liberal Party's government. As a matter of fact, I was one of the engineers who reviewed the Chinese drawings at the Ministry of Works. And the Chinese drawings themselves had a lot of flaws when it came to their air conditioning system. We had issues with them when it came to our building codes. based on the drawings that they delivered. And we corrected them in a meeting with the Chinese engineers, and they said to us that they would go back, they would revise those drawings and bring them back to the Bahamas for us to review them again. It took them a number of months before they returned. An election took place. There was a change in government, and that was the reason why there was the delay with those drawings. It had nothing to do with that. As a matter of fact, the Chinese engineers thanked us, thanked the engineers from the Bahamas, because we taught them something. Because had we gone forward with their design, we would have ended up with mold in that building, like the former administration had hired some others, some foreign engineers to do a design for the air conditioning system for the education building. And that was one of the major reasons why the education building had mold in it. And incidentally enough, Mr. Speaker, I also did a report for that. And if the last administration had gone through with what was suggested, we would have addressed that situation at education.
Thank you, Honourable Member. We shall move on. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Montague. You may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm moving right along.
Go right ahead.
The comments that have gone back and forth here, Mr. Speaker, clearly demonstrate something that needs to be addressed in this country. We spend our time with the old blame game. We sit in here for hours, other side, carrying on about, oh, you did this and you did that. And the fact of the matter is, we need to get over that, get beyond that. We're not concerned with what happened 5 years ago. That's not going to help this country advance. We need to look forward. The issue is not who screwed up back there. Let's go forward. All right?
Members.
Now, I didn't expect the Honorable Prime Minister to have a different view. That was the view he expressed a year ago when he came into office. So I did not expect him for one moment to have a different view. But let us allow each other to have our different views on this matter. I don't accept everything the Prime Minister said with regard to that, or the other projects. I am suggesting that there are two views in this country. We constantly, our members on the other side seem to feel that there's only one, there's only one view. We had the member for Fox Hill the other day, carrying on about the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister. Somebody had written a complimentary article about him, and suddenly you're not entitled to have a different view from them.
Absolutely.
This has to stop.
Their way or the highway.
Whether they like it or not, there is a different view. Many people will continue to regard Mr. Hubert Ingram as the best Prime Minister this country's ever had. That is their entitlement.
That's right.
If the member opposite has a different view, that is his right.
A member stands on a point of order. Member yield. The Chair recognizes member for Fox Hill.
Sorry, sir. I just don't want to have my views misrepresented, because I think the whole thrust of the presentation I made was precisely the point he's making, which is I had a different view. I wasn't complaining about the view. I said I have a different view. And I put that view. And I stand by that view.
And you said you were not complaining.
And I wasn't complaining. I don't care. All I said was to hear my side. This is how I think of it. And that's what I said.
Members, this is a debate. This is a debating chamber. Just be respectful of each other and not personalize it. Member for Montague, continue, please.
So, Speaker, I think I was suggesting that this present administration was seeking to take credit for every single project that had occurred in this country since 2002. And I think the Prime Minister confirmed that.
From Columbus, man.
If, however, Mr. Speaker, one reviews these projects, you will quickly realize that the government does, in fact, try to take credit for anything which was ever thought of, even though no one bothered to mention it to anyone else. It's a thought in your head. I thought about that. Therefore, I am the one who had that idea. The fact that a 10-foot wall was constructed at the entrance of Lyndon Pinling Airport and the name changed to Lyndon Pinling Airport does not in any way suggest that the PLP built the airport. The PLP promised, as a matter of priority, to rebuild the straw market when it came to power in 2002.
I was in the head, too.
The fact that a few pylons were put in the ground in 2007 does not gain, in my view, the idea that they are entitled to claim the credit for building the straw market. Examples such as these demonstrate a mindset which suggests that because I may have thought of doing something, it was nevertheless a thought in my head, so the fact that I even failed to mention the idea to anyone else does not prevent me from claiming credit for the project.
That's right, Montague. Speak,
when the FNM proceeds to implement it. The FNM does, the PLP
members,
doing it.
Members.
Yes, Montague.
Montague, resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. I like silence. Member for Montague. You may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, in my view, the FNM does, and the PLP talks of doing it. PLP really must think they can tell the Bahamian people anything and they will believe it. But as a consequence of the failure of this government to even scratch the surface of the endless promises which they made to the people of this country prior to the 2012 election, the people finally realized they cannot believe that party.
Amen.
You fooled me once in 2002. You fooled me twice in 2012. But in this game, it's 2 strikes and you're out. No third try.
Oh, Lord.
We can't take it anymore.
Oh, Lord.
Mr. Speaker, the people in this country
Oh,
cannot.
Lord.
You promised me that the cow will jump over the moon, but you can't even deliver the cow, much less the moon.
Oh, Lord.
In this environment, it is difficult, Mr. Speaker, to focus on a budget which is simply a bunch of numbers, thrown together with little assistance in interpreting them. The government has seen fit to juggle the numbers by moving certain categories into other areas without explanation, and one would have thought that if that exercise was going to be carried out, the government would treat the budget in the same manner as a general audit, would add notes to explain the changes.
Yes.
Perhaps this was an effort to make this side look as if it doesn't know what it's doing. Even though Einstein himself, he's here, would not be able to understand the figures without some guidance.
You don't understand figures.
I do not profess to have any expertise in accounting or financial matters to assist me in understanding the budget. But I am really in the same position as the majority of persons in this House. And consequently, it would seem appropriate that in circumstances such as these, where the government has made major changes in the format of the budget, there would be a note to assist anyone in understanding it. I would support the member for Central and South Eleuthera's call for a greater involvement of the electorate in the judicial process by volunteering for jury service. I know of persons, Mr. Speaker, who failed to register to vote simply because they wish to avoid jury service. If this is your reason for not registering, then don't sit back and complain about what is happening in the courts and what is happening in this country. Because being a part of the judicial process as a juror is an obligation of citizenship.
Yes, it is.
That we should all take seriously. The member also paid homage to the government's claim to implement swift justice. From a personal viewpoint, I see little evidence of there being any movement in that direction. However, I am prepared to give the government more time to address the matter before suggesting that that policy is also a failure. I have suggested on previous occasions, Mr. Speaker, that we are really a lawless society. At some point, this government needs to take the lead in ensuring that the laws of this country are obeyed.
And enforced.
And further, that it is an obligation of each member of this place to lead by example. A friend of mine recently visited Singapore, and I asked him what was the first thing he noticed on arrival in Singapore. And he said, without hesitation, the most amazing thing that hit him immediately was the cleanliness of the city and the country, like a Disney World. You drop a piece of paper on the ground and you immediately remove it. Now, the reason why it remains the way that this friend found it is because the law is enforced. And as a consequence, people obey it. You spit on the ground in Singapore and you're fined $100. So people don't spit on the ground. So you imagine dropping a piece of paper. I don't know what the fine is for that. You don't do it. And once you have people realize that they are hurting their country, their environment, by doing things like that, then they will join in and they will follow suit and make this country a better place. As a young boy, I remember seeing signs at Montague Beach stating there was, I think it was a £100 fine for littering. Well, eventually they moved the signs. I'm not sure whether it was because it had the success that it was intended to have, or whether they just gave up in desperation and just removed it. They realized they're wasting their time. But you can see every single Sunday, every weekend, every holiday that is celebrated in this country, and you go to a place like Montague Beach, the government has to employ a large number of personnel every day to clean it up. We need to clean up our own mess.
Yes, we do.
There's sufficient receptacles which are provided, but instead of that, we would prefer to litter the country. We need to take pride in our country. Government can, however, do its bit by ensuring that the law is enforced. We need a little of this zero tolerance promised by the Commissioner of Police. But more importantly, we need a commitment by Bahamians to take pride in their country, abide by the laws of this country. I'm sure anyone over the age of 10 would be told by their parents that cleanliness begets cleanliness, and cleanliness is next to godliness. Garbage is, however, Mr. Speaker, the tip of the iceberg. And while one would not suggest that you place littering in the same category as housebreaking or unlawful possession of a firearm, it is nevertheless a part of the problem. Society must be governed by laws and rules, and there must be consequences if we neglect to obey them. In a utopia, one would not litter, one would not steal, and one would not kill. However, human nature is such that we only speak of a utopia. And as a consequence, it is necessary for society to be governed by laws. But that is all for naught if the government will not enforce the laws. And by doing so, members of society will ultimately obey the law without having to be punished. They get tired of being fined. There's been much talk of an emphasis being placed on the opportunities offered for agricultural advancement in this society. And while there is a need, without question, for us to attempt to provide much of our food needs. We need to be realistic. It's unfortunate that the government seems to have placed emphasis on Andros as the sole breadbasket of the Bahamas. However, I trust that this apparent slant does not ignore the enormous agricultural potential of islands like Eleuthera, Abaco, Exuma, and Long Island. We, Mr. Speaker, we can take pride in some of the agricultural products that we produce, in that we have probably the sweetest pineapples in the world, the tastiest tomatoes, the best onions, all of these things we provide. Now, whether we can provide them and produce them in an economic way to enable us to sell them to other countries that is the challenge. The countries in which we would compete on agricultural products have a major advantage. Their labor force is being paid a fraction of what labor force charges in the Bahamas. And in those circumstances, it'll be very difficult for us to compete. And we'll need to determine a solution to solve that, because ultimately the only way that we can really address it will be by the importation of foreign labor. And I don't know whether, that is something that government had in mind when they talked about expanding the agricultural industry. But it's certainly something that needs to be seriously looked at. No doubt our Minister of Immigration will give that some thought later on. Now, when I spoke some weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, I spoke to the need to impose some type of restriction on the export of conch in this country. Now, I thought at the time that the Minister for Agriculture and Fisheries had accepted my view, and it's not simply my view, it is supported by data, that we are faced with a crisis, another crisis. And if we don't address it now, in short order, we're going to have no conch, or it's become so expensive that you won't be able to afford it. We need to address it now. We cannot continue to export 500,000 pounds of conch that we know of every year. Now, I don't know where you think 500,000 conch probably would fill up this room. And you start realizing the enormity of what we are doing. We don't have the resources to continue to do that. Why do you think the fisherman has to go further and further afield every year to try and find conch? And again, it seems to me that government sticks its head in the sand like there's no problem. Well, I don't want to be the one to tell them, I told you so, in a couple of years' time, when you go down to the dock and they don't have any. Or there's a closed season, or you're banned, you can't collect them for years. But that is what it's going to be like if we don't address it now.
A member for Michael rises. Member yields. The chair recognizes honorable member for Michael.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for Montague. Mr. Speaker, for the second or third time, I speak from this very place with respect to the conch issue. I've indicated before, and I do so again, the conch quota is set by an international organization called CITES. CITES is the organization which monitors the availability of the conch fishery and sets the quota for export. Every year since I was minister, we followed CITES recommendations. there is no scientific basis upon which I could act to stop or ban the export of conch. As a result of there being no scientific basis upon which to make such a decision, my government has just a few days ago approved a research-based company spending $1.18 million to ensure that whatever decision we make going forward, it's scientific-based. The study will tell us the exact condition of the conch fishery. At the moment, it's all but guessing. We have almost 100,000 square miles of water. That's the sea. And conch live in the sea. We do not know the exact extent of the availability or the extent to which the conch fishery is threatened. It's all talk, talk, talk. Hence, I have asked and got the government's approval to get the study done once and for all. If the study proves that we need to do a ban or prevention of the export, I will be the first to make the recommendation. But until then, I conclude my remarks by saying the Bahamian fishermen and the Bahamian people almost live every day by the eating of conch. Their livelihoods depend to a great extent on the sale of the conch fishery. And it will be foolish, it will be foolhardy for this government to ignore any science-based decision or findings. But until then, I don't want the member for Montague believe that he has an all-knowing mind, because he's only thinking about it. And so I ask him to allow the study to be completed, and I will allow this Parliament to know what the findings are, and we will act thereupon. Until then, quietness is the request I make of you.
Very well.
I just say I make the request.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, it seems
Member for Montague.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems to me as if my friend is perhaps in his mind, the member for Acklands and Michael. If, in his view, he's speaking from the member for Michael, is speaking in the same way that I am speaking. He has there's no empirical data that the government is apparently in possession of, which would support my position or indeed would support his position. I believe that tonight there is in fact a meeting at the
Member for Montague. Member for Marathon, your eyes on a point of order?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Marathon.
During the member's remark from Montague, he said that he based his view on data. Yes. He used the word data, meaning, I assume, scientific data, that would conclude that the conch stock is in danger. The member for Michael, who's the minister, rose to say that as far as he is aware and the government is aware, there is no such data. And so it's not a question of opinion one way or the other. The point is he said that his opinion was based on data. And the member for Michael and minister said there is no such data. And so at this point it's only conjecture, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Montague, be so advised. The minister has spoken to the issue. There's not clear-cut evidence at this time, but a study is being conducted.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I find that difficult to accept because it would seem strange that the National Trust, who are obviously a group which is concerned very closely with this matter, would not share information which they have regarding this matter with the ministry. I would find that hard to accept. And I would also let the minister know that, in fact, tonight, at this very hour, I think, they're having a meeting at the National Trust, which I think the minister would find very informative in that it is dealing with the same issue with which I'm talking about. And I think that the end result of that meeting, they didn't tell me about it until I'm here. I only found about it because I was inquiring. I was making inquiries with regard to this to see whether or not they had data. They showed me that they have, and that at that moment they told me there was a meeting. So I'm sure they would share that information.
Member for Marathon, is it you want to?
It's not a job.
Member for Marathon rises on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder whether or not this is the same National Trust who had nothing to say when the Aga Khan dredged in the Exuma Land and Sea Park in Concut. In Concut, Mr. Speaker. They had nothing to say then about Conc, Mr. Speaker. I want to know whether or not this is the same National Trust that he's talking about, who's so concerned about Conc now. When we raised the issue about them dredging in Concut, where the Conc was there for years and years, and in fact, every day they had divers moving the conch out of the conch so they could dredge, and by the time they came back the next morning, the conch were returning. Every day they did this for months and months, and then they continued even after that to dredge conch cut. It's called conch cut for a reason, Mr. Speaker, because that's where the conch go to grow. And this is the same National Trust today that's talking about shortage of conch.
The National Distrust.
Very well.
Yeah, it cannot be the same National Trust, Mr. Speaker.
Member, you continue to state your position as a point of view and not on the basis of fact unless you have evidence.
Mr. Speaker, I will
continue with your presentation.
I will share it, Mr. Speaker, with the minister when I get it. I expect to get it tomorrow. But I am surprised that the ministry has not, in fact, already been provided with that information. Now, I don't know the last occasion on which the member for Marathon went diving in Concut, but it is simply a name. Maybe he can't get to bottom there, but I can assure you there are very few conch in Concut, even today. So I don't know where he
Member, just continue to manage your continence. Member for Marathon.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that this is on national TV. I'm glad the people in Exuma Keys are listening. Those who know me know that I go to the Exuma Keys every single summer for 2 to 3 weeks on my boat. I've been doing so for the last 8 to 9 years. I have a captain's license, which allows me to move from the Bahamas all the way into Florida and back without any problems. I've had that for almost 20 years. I dive regularly in Concut. I did a documentary with regard to the dredging in Concut, which is videoed. It's not in my imagination. I presented it to the country, and if you want to go online today, it is there for the world to see. Conch and Concut, interviews with the persons who are diving from Black Point every single day to move the conch, and every day they went back. Interviews with people in Stanwell Key, who go and take tours in that area, spoke in that documentary which I prepared, which I paid for out of my own funds. Mr. Speaker, because I have an interest in that area, because I go there every summer with my family, and my kids dive in the Exumas and have been diving there for many, many years. I can't go as deep as I used to, but I could dive to the bottom of Concord, and that's only 20 feet. Mr. Speaker, it's not deep at all. I know the area very well, like the back of my hand. So I know of what I speak, in case the member thinks only he travels through the Exuma Keys.
Very well. Thank you, Honorable Member. Member for Montague. Member for Montague, address the chair and continue.
Well, maybe you'd be impressed, West End. You'd be impressed. Now, maybe
Rest on Bahama.
Maybe when
but address the chair, member, honorable member.
Maybe when the member for Marathon is giving his rendition of what's happening in Concut, he will be sure that he will provide me and indeed the country and this House with the details of the select committee that I have been seeking to obtain committee meeting on from February of 2013 with regard to the Nolly which was issued by this member for Mr. and Mrs. Hales.
Oh my God.
We have been ignoring our request from February of 2013.
So bring all that in here with Concut.
So why we're talking about Concut, let's talk about the whole thing.
The member rises on a point of order. The chair recognizes the member for Marathon.
Mr. Speaker, I have addressed this issue on the Nolly before, and obviously the member who is an attorney is pretending as if he does not understand. Mr. Speaker, I dealt with Concut, Mr. Speaker. Now he's on to something else. I'm going to deal with that too, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I draw your attention again to Article 78 of the Constitution. Article 78 talks about the function of the Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to read it. 78(1). The Attorney General shall have the power in any case in which he considers it desirable to do so, 1, to institute or undertake criminal proceedings against any person before any court in respect of an offense against the law of the Bahamas. B, to take over and continue any such criminal proceedings that may have been instituted by any other person or authority. C, to discontinue at any stage before judgment is delivered any such criminal proceedings instituted or undertaken by himself or any other person or authority. 2, the powers, I get into that, the powers of the Attorney General under Article 1 of this article may be exercised by him in person or through persons acting under and in accordance with his general or specific instructions. 3, the powers conferred upon the Attorney General in subparagraph 1.
Member, you resume your seat.
Making a point.
Member for Montague, resume your seat.
Of this article should be vested in him.
Member for Marathon, if you could summarize.
Yes. Article.
Oh my God.
Article 4, 78 sub 4, Mr. Speaker. And this is the important one. And this is an answer to the member's question about a select committee. In the exercise of the powers conferred upon him by this article, the Attorney General shall not be subject to the direction or control of any other person or authority, Mr. Speaker. That's in the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. And so he can go on about select committee much as he likes. There is no authority anywhere in this country to review a decision based on the decision that was made by me when I was acting as Attorney General in this matter. I have stated clearly the reasons why I made that decision. And, Mr. Speaker, there's a reason why, and I might as well deal with this now, Mr. Speaker. There's a reason why this has not taken hold in this country, as much as they try to make it an issue, Mr. Speaker, because people know quite well that every day the Attorney General exercises his power like this under their administration, when they went far enough to issue a nollie for someone who's charged with murder, Mr. Speaker. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, people know full well, Mr. Speaker, that I guard my integrity well. I protect my integrity at all costs. And there is nothing that anybody can do in this country to influence me to make a decision which I know is wrong, Mr. Speaker, and not in the public interest. I did not come to office to have my integrity challenged in this way, Mr. Speaker.
Numbers.
The member on
There's one person on the floor, one honorable member.
The member on the other side is an attorney. He is fully aware of the powers that vest in the Attorney General to make decisions like this, and it cannot be questioned or challenged by him or anybody else in this place, Mr. Speaker, and he knows that.
Thank you, honorable.
And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, if he's trying to impugn my character, I stand on my integrity, Mr. Speaker, that the decision I made, I would make again today, and if whenever they get in office, whenever they may get in office, they will be able to review the file.
Members.
they will be able to review the files for themselves and see that in the circumstances, the decision I made would have been made by any other Attorney General faced with the facts that I was faced with and the recommendations which are on the file. And my handwriting is on the file, Mr. Speaker. I'm not running from that. And as I said, I will do it again, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Chair will not allow further discourse as far as that concerned. Member for Montague, continue and move on, please.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do not think it fair, in light of what the member for Marathon has stated, to suggest that that I am unable to comment on what is said. I did not make an issue, Mr. Speaker, over whether or not the Attorney General had the authority to do what in fact has been done. That is not an issue. The issue, Mr. Speaker, is the circumstances under which it was done. The individual was a client of the Attorney General of this country. She so happened to be out of the country. The member opposite from Central and South Eleuthera is her voice in this Parliament. He also was absent from the country at that time. And then so happens that the Minister for Education...
Resume your seat, Member 5. You will be recognized. You will be recognized. Member.
That the member for Marathon was acting Attorney General for, what was it, a week? And it so happened that as a matter of urgency, it was necessary for him to go into the Attorney General's office to pick out this file, and lo and behold, he discovered, after this matter being on record for I think, years, to decide that this was a matter of national importance and that he would issue a nollie.
Very well.
Those are what is concerned to this country.
Very well. Thank you, Honourable Member. Member yields. The chair wants to hear... The member yields. The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Marathon.
Mr. Speaker, let me make this point. The first point, Mr. Speaker, is that I was acting as Attorney General from May 10, 2012. Whenever the Attorney General left the country, I was acting. I said that. I was acting Minister of Immigration, Youth Sports. Nothing abnormal about that. That's the first thing. The point, though, Mr. Speaker, that I rose on was because the member said that he had on the record an application for a select committee. I was responding to that. If he wants to run on about whatever he wants to run on the facts, I don't have any problem with that. I was responding to a specific point that he made, that maybe I would want to respond, as I did about Concut. I would want to respond to his request for a select committee. So I stood and I responded to that. That's all I did. He can get up in here every time he stands and make accusations. That's fine. I have no problem with that. That's part of it. I accept that. But I don't want him to give any impression that I'm going to fail to respond to something that he has requested. And in this case, the point I'm making is that the Constitution says that I don't have to answer to him or anybody else, but I chose to in any event. By statement in this place, by press release out in the public, I'm not running away from it. And I've said it and I'll say it again. If I had to do it again, I would do it again because it was the right thing to do in the circumstances. And I don't care, and I don't know how many times I have to say it. I don't know how loud I have to say it. But those are the facts, and that is my position, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Central and South Eleuthera.
The only people on whose behalf I speak in this place are the people who elected me to this House, the people of Central and South Eleuthera. I sit here, I stand here on that authority and that authority alone. I speak on issues affecting the Office of the Attorney General and the Ministry of Legal Affairs because I was appointed as a Minister of State in those two ministries. I would hope that the member for Montague, in his over-exuberance, would guide his statements so as not to mistakenly convey the purpose and description of my appearance in this space.
Very well. Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Montague, be so advised. Member, the chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Montague.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members opposite can seek to sweep under the carpet whatever they want. But as far as the public in this country go, Mr. Speaker, something smells in the state of Denmark. Something smells, okay? And that is what is of concern to the constituents in this country.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Speaker, there are many other issues which, in light of what I've said about crime, may pale in comparison to that particular issue. But something which has caused me some distress is, for years, we have had dilapidated buildings in this country which are allowed to remain there. They become a fire hazard. They are unsightly, and if they're not ready to fall down, they're ready to go up in smoke. And the Ministry of Works has, I understand, the requisite authority to enable them to deal with these eyesores. But they don't. And the fact of the matter is, I'm not picking on this particular product. You want the authority?
Member for Montague. Member for Montague.
Well, perhaps.
Address the chair and the chair only.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Well, you can advise members opposite that there is a bill called an act called the Building Regulations Act. Section 10 specifically, which gives government the authority to remove dangerous or dilapidated buildings or structures. And I urge government to take that act seriously and to start dealing with it. We have the issue with which I am particularly concerned is each day as I drive home in the evening, if you go by, before you get to the pilot house, there's a dilapidated building there which is a fire hazard. You have people living in it? I don't think anybody living in this one. They couldn't live in this one. It's dropping down. The roof is falling in. And yet it's allowed to remain there in an area where tourists, visitors, everyone visit there daily. It is a total hazard. When that building goes up in smoke, Pilot House is right next to it, 20 feet away from it. And when the Pilot House burns down, then you've got the boatyard next to it. And unless something is done with that, we are going to one day face a very serious problem in that area. A member in this house lives in Pilot House, and I would like to bring it to his attention that his house is in danger because that building is falling down. The garbage collection there is deplorable. They have a swimming pool in the back that the only thing swimming in it are the mosquitoes. There's 1 million mosquitoes there. And they have a serious problem. It's a health hazard. And so the government needs to address that. That, of course, is not the only building which requires attention. But if we have any serious intention to move this country forward, we have to start dealing with unsightly buildings such as that. But it's not simply the view that is of concern. As I say, it is a hazard. If that building caught fire, I hate to think what would happen. While the... I have heard varying reports, so I have heard varying reports. But the government has the authority to give a notice to someone to demolish it. If they don't demolish it, then the government has the authority, as I understand it, to demolish that building and to ensure that the party who owns the property pays for the cost. Now, this really is the same sort of issues. Why does government have the concern of cleaning up your yard, mowing your cutting down the bush in your property, removing trees at hurricane time which become a hazard to the electrical poles. Why does government pay for that? We have financial constraints, and yet we don't have the framework to ensure that people look after their own property. Why should government go to that expense? So what I am suggesting is that it seems to me that a lot of areas there in the Montague constituency which have been cleared by urban renewal, and it would seem to me that rather than have to pay for the cost every couple of months of cutting down the bush again, that one authorizes the residents to use those properties for the purpose of setting up their own garden, have their backyard garden, where they would then have the the need to ensure that it is kept clear. Now, as part of the health issue that we are concerned, the crime issue that we're concerned with, I think we would all agree that the conditions in the prison here are deplorable. And government needs to put as a priority the necessary procedures in place to start addressing the conditions at the prison. Because all we are doing at the moment is we're breeding criminals. If you weren't a criminal when you went in, you sure are going to be one when you come out. And until we start addressing that, we're going to be faced with the issues that we're being faced with today. Now, government at one time had, I think as part of its charter of governance, had indicated that they proposed doing something with regard to land registration. And while this has been a ball that's been thrown around among the political arena for several years, and no doubt the legal fraternity, it is, in my view, a priority, Mr. Speaker. I have been aware of so many instances in which persons, many of whom are not Bahamian, who acquire land in the Bahamas and the title is defective. They are unable to have any compensation whatsoever. In many instances, the attorneys don't have the requisite insurance in place to enable them to be compensated, and it is got to the point where, as far as I could see, people are not going to invest in this country if they are unable to be sure that they're going to get good title to property. And it needs to be addressed. I realize there's an expense involved, but this is something which affects the overall prosperity of the Bahamas. If we don't address that, we're going to continue to have that problem. Yeah. I'm talking about land registration, yes. Now, the member for Golden Gates, in his dissertation on the National Insurance Board, indicated some interesting things which are being proposed or are already in process. But an issue which I feel is very important and needs to be addressed at this time is that it should be possible for any employee at the end of every year to receive a confirmation from NIB that my national insurance contributions are current up to this particular date. Because what I find in far too many instances is people will work at a company, the company or with an individual, take out your contribution every week out of your salary, and they don't pay it to national insurance. And there you go at the end of, you've been working somewhere for 10 years, you go down to national insurance to make a claim and say, hey, you have not made any contribution. Well, it happens far too many times. And I would suggest that it is something which really needs to be addressed by the National Insurance Board, because far too many people are being scammed by their employers. We've seen a number of cases where corporations here have left the country. They're either broke or they have moved elsewhere, and there is no way whatsoever of that individual collecting the contributions which should have been paid by his employer. So that is something which I would encourage the minister to look at, and I don't know what the cost would be, but it's certainly something that's important enough for the board to consider implementing.
Member for, the member yields. The chair recognizes the member for Golden Gates on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the member that that's a huge issue. Where many employees deduct contributions and they don't forward on the national insurance, but there's a process in place now where individuals can actually request a statement on a regular basis from national insurance. And so the process is not where it's actually printed and issued, because that's a lot of paperwork. And maybe one day we'll get to the point where they can just transmit it electronically to individuals. But right now, we encourage individuals to check with national insurance on a regular basis to make sure that the contributions are actually being submitted to the National Insurance Board. And you have a lot of employees who inquire and they request information, and they find out from time to time that contributions are not being submitted. And so maybe one day we can reach that point, but right now employees can now request from National Insurance a statement of their account that would outline exactly how many contributions are being made on their behalf.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Montague. May continue.
Thank the minister, and at least there seems to be something in place there, but it seems to me that there almost should be a statutory requirement that you do that, because not everybody's going to ask to have a statement periodically from the National Insurance Board until they actually need it, and then they find out then it's too late. Now, Mr. Speaker, I find it difficult to make any final assessment of my position as regards to this budget communication and the proposed lending, in that there are far too many issues which need to be explained and addressed by members opposite before I would be in a position to make any meaningful assessment of what I view it as. I realize that as far as the proposed lending goes, borrowing, we probably got very little say in the matter. But anyway, I would reserve my position until I've actually seen a full explanation of the various items in the budget. So I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many. The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Angliston.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I am privileged to rise in this honorable House to contribute to this debate on the 2013-2014 national budget. I wish to first acknowledge and thank the good people of Angliston who have elected me as their political representative in this House for 3 consecutive elections. Although it is interesting to note, Mr. Speaker, that in each of those 3 elections, Angliston either gained new territory or lost traditional territory. Angliston today, as a result of the Boundaries Commission report preceding the May 2012 elections, represents a composite of portions of what was previously 5 different constituencies. The one good thing about gerrymandering of boundaries, though, is that no matter how devious the mastermind's intentions might have been, at least in my case, I have had the privilege and opportunity to be introduced to new communities filled with wonderful people. An uplifting and engendering experience I will never regret. So I thank the former Prime Minister for giving me that experience. And so, Mr. Speaker, I acknowledge and thank the excellent people of Angliston for this opportunity to serve. I vowed from day one, and the record will reflect in this Hansard, that I would seek to have an uncompromising voice in this Parliament on their behalf, that I would uphold and be true to the principles upon which the Progressive Liberal Party was founded, and that it was my prayer that I would never let them down. Mr. Speaker, that continues to be my commitment, but today, even more fervent than before. I also take this opportunity to thank the member for Centerville for appointing me to his cabinet, thereby providing me with the profound privilege to serve my beloved country and the people of the Bahamas. Speaker, I do not intend to be very long in this contribution, and I will seek to give a succinct overview of some of the work we are engaged in the Ministry of Transport and Aviation, and the part we are seeking to play in taking the country forward progressively and positively in the interest of the Bahamian people. But before I do so, Mr. Speaker, I just want to provide a context for the way forward in our country and from whence we are coming. Speaker, and I heard the member from Montague, but we need to give a context, lest we not understand where we are and how we got here. In this country, Mr. Speaker, we experience the ravages of a terrible economic meltdown, which has had devastating effects on many of our people, and in particular upon the most vulnerable amongst us, the elderly, the impoverished, and children. But in truth, most of us have been negatively impacted in one way or another during this economic drought. When the story is told in its fullness, it will no doubt be one of incredible suffering and hardship for many people, and the loss of many cherished possessions, such as our homes, which we fought hard to acquire, a private education which we were proud to provide for our children, the privilege of job security, numerous quality of life issues such as ease of access to food and luxury of a peace of mind, and much more. All these things, Mr. Speaker, came in question over the last several years. Many will recall the psychological stresses and strains suffered by people, sometimes impacting physical health, strokes, heart attacks, and brought on by the worries and challenges of these economic woes. And Mr. Speaker, I tried to avoid, in my older age in this House, to get down in this political finger-pointing that the member spoke of, the blame game he spoke of. But in fact, the member from Montague, in my humble opinion, superbly engaged in a blame game at its fullest manifestation. And what we have, and I agree with him that crime is a serious issue. But I am reminded that when he speaks about the problem of crime in this country, we have to bear in mind that we inherited a wild horse called crime, running wildly down the road in this country. Our task now is to bring it under control. We didn't take office and then all of a sudden we had a serious issue of social discord in our country. This is a continuing issue. In fact, speaking with the member for Bain and Grandstand, I am reminded that in 2011, that this country reached a peak in terms of murder in this country. That was while we were sitting over there in opposition. So, we understand crime is an issue, and we're all concerned about it. But we don't want the issue distorted. Because, in truth, Mr. Speaker, we have to remember the Bahamian people are not stupid. They are a very astute population, and they understand that this is a continuing dilemma. And this is why people are so concerned, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, in the midst of this economic maelstrom, our country has also seen this terrible disruption to our public peace and an increase in deadly violence and crime in general. Speaker, and the member from Montague spoke about a situation, I think that it's the same issue that touches me very deeply also. And it gave me a poignant sense of sadness. I went to a particular food store last week, Saturday, which I frequent, and I saw some of the packing boys walking through an aisle wearing T-shirts with a photo of one of the other packing boys who had attended to me before, and who I always found to be respectful and helpful and well-trained. And I inquired as to why they were wearing his picture on their shirt. And they shared with me his obituary. And, Mr. Speaker, this brought home for me the reality that this young man had vacated the planet. And my heart sank, because at the age of 17 years, he had been struck down by bullets, apparently fired indiscriminately into a yard. He was one of 2 murder victims in that incident, a student at R.M. Bailey, and due to graduate in the next few days. Mr. Speaker, the faces of his young co-workers were something that I can't explain. To say it was shock and disbelief and sadness are just words. Mr. Speaker, it's what I saw in the face of these young men. Speaker, this terrible true life incident of this young boy for me brought home the full and utter tragedy of violence in our country today. Speaker, but we have to be fair to the issue. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is the negative circumstances we have faced in the last few years, this economic tornado that has left devastation in its wake, suffering of our people, and a seemingly unrelenting wave of violence have created the conditions for what might be called the perfect storm in our country. This is what has come together, Mr. Speaker. And this may be a simplistic summary of what has transpired in the last few years in the lives of our people. But I am seeking to illustrate, Mr. Speaker, the utter hardship and turbulence our country has seen. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that despite that, there are still signs of alleviation and recovery happening in this country. And the objective of this budget is to give momentum to these early signs, while at the same time stabilizing what has become a delicate situation as it relates to our national debt. Speaker, this is a delicate balance. Not only did we inherit the wild horse of violence in this country, we inherited significant debt, significant national debt. Speaker, the wild horse of debt. Or some may say the wild donkey of debt, Speaker. Speaker, on the issue of crime and violence, Speaker, this is a matter which is dominating the national conversation, and one which is in all of our minds, and for good reason. Speaker, surely we must all now consider, and I think the member for Montague agrees with that, our present state of affairs as a wake-up call for all of us as citizens, Speaker. And I want to say, I disagree with the member for Montague when he says we are a lawless society. I don't accept that. But I would say, though, that we should not relinquish our country to a handful of aimless, lawless, careless individuals who are wreaking havoc on our national psyche and leaving us trembling and cowering in fear, and so many people dissolved in tremendous pain. We have to be clear and courageous in our assertion of ownership of this, our beloved Bahama land. Speaker, this is our responsibility to ourselves, to our children, and to children who have not yet come. Indeed, even to those who came before us, who fought so hard to build this country, Speaker. Now is the time, in the middle of our troubles, for Bahamians to step forward and begin to purposely demonstrate in our homes, in the workplace, on our streets, the highest levels of discipline and ethics, hard work, and common courtesy, and yes, Mr. Speaker, even love for one another. Speaker, there was a time in our country when love was in large supply to overflow, and we shared it generously. It did not make us weak. This made us a better people and helped us to identify who we were. Sometimes you get the feeling, Mr. Speaker, that it is now a dirty word in some quarters. Mr. Speaker, the state, the government, will do its part as it must. And it is an approach, as you would have heard, and I said it's part in terms of addressing this issue of crime. And I want to say to the member of Montague, and I'm not continuously singling him out, but you raised, oh? So what? No, no, I just wanted, this point you raised about getting to the root of crime. I think that the approach of this government, as distinguished from the prior administration, has a multifaceted approach to the issue of crime. You see it in the initiatives of the urban renewal teams on the ground every day. Now, you may have your judgments about it, but they're on the ground every day, knocking on doors, visiting the businesses, dealing with young people in the communities, they're on the ground, Mr. Speaker.
Right.
You find also this budget deals with better equipped police officers. You heard about the issue of filling in the gaps in the delivery of education to our children, children with special needs, Mr. Speaker. You're going to hear when the member for Yamacross speaks about better access to social services assistance and other like initiatives. So this approach is multifaceted. It is not just with the police force, but it includes the police force, as the member for Seabury spoke about the resources given. But it is a much broader approach. But the issue is a serious one. And as was pointed out, it did not happen overnight. And it's become somewhat entrenched, Speaker. I'm also very pleased that the member for Fox Hill, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigration, executed on behalf of our country the Small Arms Treaty. Yep. I believe this is a truly significant initiative. This new collaboration with the United States of America, one of the largest manufacturers in the world of firearms, should effectively assist in the interdiction of illegal weapons at their borders before they are dispatched to countries such as ours and into the hands of individuals who, with their use, strike terror in the heart of communities. And, Mr. Speaker, we must wipe out the disgusting corruption, wherever it may be, and whoever perpetuates or perpetrates such an evil, which facilitates guns entering in our country to destabilize our nation and to cause bloodshed. And if they're Bahamians, they're doing it to their own people in their own country, Mr. Speaker. It's disgusting. And, Mr. Speaker, it's also very important, as simplistic as it may sound, that we do not lose sight of a very compelling fact, and that is that the Bahamas is a great country with a beautiful people. Yeah. In the middle of all our troubles, we may begin to doubt that, which we've always come to believe. We always believe that about ourselves. But we got to be careful, Mr. Speaker. This must, however, be our unrelenting theme going forward. We must not allow the challenges we face to overtake us, but must face the challenges square in the face. The truth must drive us forward as we focus in restoring the Bahamas to its rightful place, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is because of our recent collective ordeal and our ongoing challenges and my conviction that we are a great country with a hopeful future that in my public service I am imbued with a sense of urgency. I am compelled to move quickly to redress where I can outstanding problems. The Ministry of Transport of Aviation, we're moving steadily to implement enhanced standards so that there are no gray areas in how the Bahamas is perceived in our standards of safety and security or any aspect of essential operations. We are moving expeditiously to assure the efficient and timely delivery of services and the conduct of smooth operations. We move in a considered way to introduce new innovations and to facilitate new opportunities for young Bahamians. And I hope to illustrate these things shortly, Mr. Speaker. We are finding new avenues to enhance revenue streams and to improve upon methods of collection of revenue, and so far as possible to introduce cost recovery initiatives so as to reduce the burden upon the public's purse. Mr. Speaker, in the interest of efficiency of time in this presentation, I will speak to all areas of this ministry collectively under the following headings. 1, standards. 2, revenue streams. 3, training and human resource development. 4, infrastructural improvement. And 5, new infrastructural initiatives. Speak on the issue of standards. If we are to move our country forward, we must provide the highest of standards in all areas of activity. This applies to everything. Our tourism product, the quality of education in our schools, in the level of service given to the public in the public service, in the quality of medical care given to those who require that care. In all things, we should as a nation commit to promoting and producing the highest of standards in all things. We should never be a nation depicted as mediocre or some negative or demeaning stereotype. This has never been our legacy, Mr. Speaker. In the region and in the world, the Bahamas must distinguish itself as an outstanding nation. We are reminded that our national anthem declares, and I quote, "See how the world marks the manner of your bearing." We are a shining people, Mr. Speaker. I don't care what they say in here. And so, Mr. Speaker, the question of standards is an important issue in my ministerial mandate. It's important to issues of safety, to issues of security, and in particular, security at ports of entry. It is important to the efficiency and quality of public services for our population. It is important that to the perceived notions held by others about our country. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, implementing the highest of standards on a sustained basis protects our economy and powerfully positions the Bahamas to effectively compete with other nations in what is becoming a highly competitive environment. We must therefore, Mr. Speaker, implement and sustain the highest standards in the public service and everywhere and in everything throughout this country. Speaker, the Bahamas is a member of several critical international bodies, most of which are branches of the United Nations. In all matters relative to the aviation sector, the relevant body is the International Civil Aviation Organization, the ICAO. In maritime matters, it is the International Maritime Organization, the IMO. In matters affecting the postal system, it is the Universal Postal Union, the UPU. And in meteorology, it is the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO. Speaker, practically every nation state in the world is a member of each of these organizations. These bodies, through collective interaction, mandate standards and practices for implementation in each member state relative to the respective areas of focus. And each member state, in turn, agrees to comply with those mandates. These standards and practices are designed and intended to improve the quality of the critical services provided and to enhance safety and security in the delivery of these services throughout the world, such that you will have uniformity worldwide and that no nation state is a weak link in the chain of nations. Speaker, states are also audited periodically to measure and test compliance with these mandates. The Bahamas has been audited by both the ICAO and the IMO in recent times. The ICAO audited the Bahamas in 2009, which included a comprehensive review of our aviation sector, including airports, security, our regulatory oversight of safety, and our laws and regulations. ICAO then did a follow-up to the 2009 audit in 2011. The IMO audited the Bahamas in 2011, and this audit included a review of our national maritime administration, including our laws and regulatory oversight impacting safety of maritime activity in the Bahamas and maritime security. Mr. Speaker, to be quite frank and very brief, in each case, the two ICAO audits in 2009 and 2011 respectively, and the IMO audit in 2011, the Bahamas was found wanting, and in some instances, seriously wanting. And Mr. Speaker, the results of these audits are published for the world to see, including the commercial carriers by air and sea that do business in the Bahamas. To more fully understand, Mr. Speaker, in a practical way, the importance of standards and the direct links to our economy, it was in fact an FAA audit in the year 2000 that led to a downgrade of the Bahamas from a Category 1 airport destination to a Category 2 airport destination. That downgrade negatively impacted our economy because it affected the size and type of aircraft that could land in the Bahamas and potentially negatively impacted the reputation of the Bahamas because it implies you do not have a proper safety oversight of aircraft. And it was the 2009 audit conducted by ICAO which again caught the attention of the FAA and led to their recent audit a few weeks ago of our safety oversight regime, which I have spoken to this Parliament about already. That audit has now been completed, and I will speak to it, Mr. Speaker, once we have the written report from the FAA in hand. We have, however, received a verbal report, and what I will say now is that it is incumbent upon me to thank the very hard-working and dedicated members of the Civil Aviation Department who went into overdrive in preparation for this audit. Speaker, Speaker, it's important to note, however, that the Bahamas will again be audited by the ICAO in October, this time in respect of our airports and air navigation services. And much work is being undertaken as we speak to ensure there are no gaps, unlike our position in 2009 and 2011. Speaker, and I don't want to get political, but those 2 dates were under the prior administration. I only do that because when you hear some of the political slant that comes from the other side about the fact that we are incompetent, incapable, can't do nothing, hopeless and helpless, need to sit under a tree and drink some coconut water. You know, it's very embarrassing because it really is the height of arrogance. Because what they're saying is that they are great and they are the only ones in this country who are capable of manifestations, Mr. Speaker.
Well, ain't nobody remember who the Minister of Aviation was?
We remember it because we know what the neglect was.
You remember?
Speaker, it is therefore very clear that it is very important that we implement the highest standards of safety and security and implement operational efficiency in these critical sectors, and that we have a system of quality assurance to continuously test the levels of these standards. So, Mr. Speaker, the matter of standards, a somewhat abstract and largely intangible thing, is nevertheless of utmost importance to us, both domestically and internationally. It is critical to our quality of life and our national economic well-being. And we saw that in those audits. We saw it in the downgrades and the impact on our economy. In the aviation sector, in accord with international mandates, we have recently passed legislation in this House to create definitive structures for aviation security, and most recently regulations were promulgated for safety oversight in the aviation sector. Again, recently legislation was passed to regulate aerodromes in our country. East Grand Bahama, let your partner know, aerodromes were included in the last regulations that were laid. Are you okay? Well, I'm glad he's listening. Additionally, personnel have been recruited and are to be trained to conduct oversight and to diligently ensure the implementation of these rules and laws. Mr. Speaker, in the maritime sector, a workshop, the first of its kind, was sponsored by the IMO and held in Freeport, Grand Bahama, a couple months ago, to begin a formal response to the IMO audit that I previously referred to, where they found us wanting. Each relevant agency is now tasked with appropriately responding by the implementation of the necessary practices or regulations. Speaker, in an effort to enhance standards on mailboats and other small cargo vessels in this country, draft legislation, a small cargo vessel code, has been prepared, which was the basis of consultation with the industry. A workshop was held several months ago, sponsored by the Port Department, with mailboat owners and other stakeholders to review the draft and offer comments and recommendations. A final draft has now been completed, and a bill will be brought to this House very shortly. The enactment of its provisions will create a comprehensive code affecting a wide range of issues, most significantly the inspection of vessels and the requirements related to manning, dry docking, emergency drills, accident reporting, environmental policies, and record keeping. The current inspection process does not take into consideration these wide-ranging and fundamental issues relative to vessels being declared fit. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to the water sports industry, you will recall that legislation was introduced to this House and passed to regulate the industry. The challenge has always been and continues to be enforcement of these regulations. The Port Department is poised to engage in dialogue with franchise owners in the first instance and their employees thereafter, so as to create a partnership between the regulator and the users, so that there is a clear understanding of the ministry's expectations on issues such as code of conduct, rotation, continuous training, and standards of safety. We will additionally sponsor mandatory training initiatives as a companion to this partnership stance on violations which impact safety on our beaches. Speaker, you will see the ministry's heightened involvement in other areas promoting safety, a culture of safety in maritime matters. One of the very vexing areas is those of us who go on fishing trips throughout the country, oftentimes not adequately equipped in a number of areas, including safety equipment such as life jackets, and without navigational aids or communication, or with no lights on the vessel, and sometimes even without adequate fuel. We have all watched and waited in dreadful anticipation when people have gone missing at sea. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, significant resources are often required to be deployed to conduct searches of missing persons. Speaker, I think the time has come, and can I say many of them are not found. Speaker, I think the time has come to begin to require minimal standards on vessels before they are to be licensed by the Port Department, and to implement a training regime for boat users. And this is a matter the Port is addressing its mind to at this time, and will implement the appropriate regulations after the appropriate consultations. Speaker, the Road Traffic Department is poised to engage in a complete overhaul of the legislative regime which governs road traffic. This is part of the IDB Road Improvement Project. A consultant has already been identified through the IDB to advise the government on critical matters affecting vehicles and all other road users and road traffic in general. This review will include a wide array of issues, including the inspection of vehicles and standards of conditions of vehicles, the regulation of public transport, offenses and penalties for a variety of traffic violations, including vehicular manslaughter. It is expected the review will take approximately 6 to 8 months. My ministry is in the process of engaging 10 additional road traffic supervisors, waiting for the approvals to come through, to oversee and regulate public transport throughout New Providence. This will greatly enhance the enforcement capability of the Road Traffic Department and will include the reintroduction of road traffic supervisors on motorcycles to provide mobility island-wide. And Mr. Speaker, and the member for Seabreeze would have touched on this, we have begun a serious dialogue with bus franchise owners, which is to continue this week. The owners have selected a small committee to lead discussions on behalf of the group. This effort is to share views on the industry, to hear the concerns of franchise owners, and to make clear the government's position on the acceptable standard of public transport in our country. It must be a safe, reliable, and efficient activity. The public transport system must be a credible alternative to driving on our congested streets. We will also be engaging bus drivers in training programs, and the Road Traffic Department will be insisting upon and enforcing a dress code for drivers and monitoring unlawful stops along the roads. There will be no compromise on the standards mandated in the delivery of public transport. And franchise holders, I didn't say drivers, I said franchise holders, will be held accountable for the quality of service they offer under their name to the Bahamian public. Speaker, I'm hopeful that very soon I will be able to give fuller detail on this matter, and that the Bahamian people will see the result in improved standards of our public transportation system in the not-too-distant future. To speak on the question of standards as it relates to the condition of vehicles and its potential impact on safety and indeed the saving of lives, a committee involving the public sector, including the Department of Customs, Department of Environmental Health, and the Ministry of National Security, and private sector stakeholders, and my ministry, including insurers and car companies, has been formed to review and make recommendations on the issue of wrecks being imported into the jurisdiction. Speaker, the introduction of car wrecks into our country and potentially on our streets has potentially serious safety and environmental implications. The recommendations coming from this group, and we expect them to come soon, will form the basis of a policy position, and the introduction of regulations will be promulgated, will be made to govern the import of wrecks. Yeah, that's an important area. Mr. Speaker, The quality of safety on our streets is a matter of grave concern throughout the country. In recent times, however, we have seen a spike in the rate of traffic fatalities on a number of family islands. And the member for Seabreeze would have alluded to, in particular, the peculiarly high rate of traffic fatalities in Eleuthera. Generally, though, throughout the country, Mr. Speaker, we continue to see sustained levels of fatalities and serious injuries as a result of car collisions. The victims are usually young people, and in particular, young men, who end up either in the morgue or intensive care or on the orthopedic ward of a hospital, oftentimes with serious spinal injuries. This is indeed a public health issue, and the ministry, as the member for Seabreeze has said, has intensified its efforts nationwide and on all fronts. However, Mr. Speaker, this is a difficult area because we're talking by and large about personal behaviors, and it is only through education and, where appropriate, coercion through the police force that we can expect to make significant headway. I must say, Mr. Speaker, though, as of late, I have observed terrible behaviors on our streets. People routinely run through red lights, even at peak hours when there are large numbers of vehicles on the roads, which is very risky behavior and, frankly, quite obnoxious. There is a level of aggression and discourtesy exhibited towards other road users these days, especially, it seems, by women. Speaker, we need to tone our stress levels down and show some love on our streets. Let someone come out the corner. You ain't got to cut someone off. Say thank you if they extend a courtesy to you. Let's show that we are good people on the streets, Speaker. Let's not give the impression that being on our roads is equivalent to a war zone, or behave as if we are prisoners to some asphalt jungle, Speaker. We have to really, really consider how we're behaving and conducting ourselves on the streets, Speaker. Speaker, the role of the Ministry of Transport and Public Education on the issue of road safety is very important. And the member for Seabreeze would have indicated that a Facebook page is being created, and I think the member has also done a number of public information ads, and she has also visited schools, Mr. Speaker. And this is all in part of an effort to raise the awareness on the importance of careful driving on our streets, because the implications are quite serious and horrible, horrendous, Speaker. Speaker, in an effort, I want to speak now to the issue of revenue. That was standards. I speak now to revenue. Speaker, in an effort to more equitably distribute the cost of the delivery of public services, because there's a cost to it, Mr. Speaker, and in an effort to relieve the strain on public resources, we have set out in my ministry to identify potential new sources of revenue for the country. A close analysis in a number of areas throughout the spectrum of public services, it will be seen throughout the country in all kinds of services that the public purse underwrites a number of activities of even a private commercial nature. Speaker, it is time overdue to review this paradigm, and as I have said, so as to more equitably distribute the cost of these services. My ministry is therefore looking at a number of cost recovery initiatives and initiatives to create new and previously untapped revenue streams, so it's cost recovery and new streams. Speaker, it is anticipated that the creation of an aircraft register will create a new branch of activity in our economy. Speaker, a committee was formed several months ago comprising officials from public and private sector entities to review and make recommendations for the implementation of an aircraft register in the Bahamas. A request for proposal has now been completed and is poised to be published. The RFP will invite proposals for the methodology, structure, and plan with a view to positioning the Bahamas as a leading, competitive, and successful aircraft registration jurisdiction. The RFP generally requires proposals for the conduct of a survey of the industry and to carry out comparative analysis for other jurisdictions so as to provide the empirical evidence upon which the government will act, Speaker. It is likely that the infrastructure of the Bahamas Maritime Authority, which already has established offices or business relationships in several countries, including London and New York, will provide a convenient shared space for the promotion of the aircraft register. Another new branch that is being explored is the expansion of our yacht registry, which is now managed by the Bahamas Maritime Authority. Work is underway to promote the register, which currently has a few yachts on its register, and to incentivize the registration of mega yachts among other pleasure vessels on the Bahamas register. It is anticipated that these new initiatives will position the Bahamas as leaders in the industry, as we have been to date in the ship registration industry. So it's quite possible, quite feasible, very imaginable, Mr. Speaker. And in this way, we will expand the base of our economy by creating new revenue streams, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my ministry has just completed, on another point, the draft lightering regulations, which will be shortly laid on the table of Parliament. Lightering is the activity of transfer of fuel from vessel to vessel while at sea. These regulations will govern what is believed to be a lucrative area potentially for revenue for the Bahamas. Currently, there are some lightering activities going on in Grand Bahama, which have been previously licensed, and previously meaning before my time, in an essentially unregulated environment. These new regulations will now permit the licensing of lightering activities for a fee payable to the government for each lightering exercise. This creates, Mr. Speaker, new revenue streams for the consolidated fund. And for the first time, which is also important, the activity will be governed by a stringent regulatory regime. Mr. Speaker, what we hope will be another source of revenue for the state, and this is also a mixed issue, is the commercial access to lighthouses, while at the same time preserving these wonderful historic sites for generations of Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, the previous administration had a policy for the decommissioning of lighthouses throughout our archipelago. The last to be decommissioned, and it hurt my heart, was the inaugural lighthouse, which is the tallest in our country. And they removed the lens. I'm told that the lens of the lighthouses are extremely valuable in the quality of material and the way in which they're made. And they were removed, and I'm told that in the transportation of it by the Defense Force or somewhere along the way, some damage was done to the lens, which are very valuable, historic items. Because these lighthouses are really exquisite examples of architecture of the era. Speaker, this administration, however, reversed that policy, and a committee was formed to make recommendations on the future of lighthouses. The committee also had the benefit of the research of an American author, Annie Potts, who has published a book on lighthouses in our country. But I wish to especially acknowledge, however, the research of our own Dr. Michael Pateman, who also serves on that committee, and who has made recommendations for a management strategy for our lighthouses. And if you would just indulge me, Speaker, I just want to go through some of these lighthouses. We don't think about it, but it's really a treasure. The Bahamas has a number of historic lighthouses. The main ones are as follows. There's one on Hog Island, or Paradise Island, which is right out here, out this way. That was built in 1817, and it is not only the oldest lighthouse in the Bahamas, but the oldest surviving lighthouse in the West Indies, Mr. Speaker. Another is the Hole-in-the-Wall Lighthouse, which was erected in 1836 and described by Dr. Pateman as one of the best examples of old-style British lighthouse architecture in the New World. There is also a lighthouse at Gun Key, which was built in 1836 and which is only accessible by boat. The Key Sal Lighthouse on Elbow Key. Then there's the Great Isaac Lighthouse, built in 1836. The Great Stirrup Lighthouse, built in 1832. The candy-striped Elbow Reef Lighthouse in Hopetown, Abaco, built in 1864, which apparently is a major, major attraction internationally. The Castle Island Lighthouse, built in 1868. The Key Lobos Lighthouse, built in 1869. The Inagua Lighthouse, the tallest in the country, built in 1870. The Bird Rock Lighthouse, built in 1876. And the San Salvador Lighthouse, built in 1887. Speaker, it is the view of this committee and my view that these lighthouses are a valuable inheritance. And during the course of the work of this committee, they were able to discover that tourism trips are planned internationally around the visitation to these lighthouses. These historic monuments to our past can very well become a most intriguing component in our tourism product, but very importantly, a great educational field trip for our children. Speaker, some exciting, and so I leave that there. We're going to come back with a management plan for the lighthouses, which will generate revenue and restore them. And, and Mr. Speaker, and I don't want to speak too quickly, but we believe that the lighthouses of the Bahamas present a case for UNESCO. Speaker, some exciting innovation, World Heritage, the collection of lighthouses. I don't think there's any country that is similarly configured and in terms of Speaker, some exciting innovation is now in train for the post office, and you would have heard from the member of Seabreeze, and she would have also said, Mr. Speaker, that it's a challenged institution, which is currently subsidized by the Bahamas government. A modernization plan has been created, Mr. Speaker, which includes the introduction of new technology to postal offerings, including hybrid mail, which I had to learn what this was about. This allows for the digital feed of documents which are encrypted and routed electronically to the end destination country, where they are then decrypted, printed, and posted. This solution allows for next-day processing and rapid mail deliveries anywhere in the world. The Post Office is also now reviewing proposals for a commercial partnership between the government and an international fast mail company to introduce a new offering in the Post Office. Additionally, the Post Office is looking to produce stamp souvenirs on a retail and wholesale basis. These new initiatives are expected to garner revenues, and the estimate I'm advised are $16 million annually, Speaker. And that is a project that is beginning to get steam and well underway. Speaker, key to maximizing the financial viability of the Post Office is the automation of aspects of its operations. As hard as it may be to believe in today's environment, significant aspects of the operations at the Post Office are done manually, as is the case with the Road Traffic Department and the Boat Registration Department of the Port. Speaker, this speaks loudly and intrinsically to the levels of efficiency or lack thereof of these departments, and their lack of efficiency, potentially, as it relates to maximizing the collection of revenues. Still doing things manually. I have committed myself, Mr. Speaker, to do all that I can to move this process of automation in these key revenue-generating agencies to its final stage, Mr. Speaker. And work is currently underway in conjunction with the Ministry of Finance and the Department of Information Technology to implement this long overdue, I wouldn't even call it innovation, but long overdue thing to the operations of these agencies. You won't call automation innovation, but unfortunately these departments don't have it, Mr. Speaker, in many areas. Modernization. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, in the area of cost recovery, a draft Meteorology Act has been completed and is being reviewed by my ministry, which it is intended will empower the Met Department to recover the cost of services offered to private commercial entities. Services which, I might add, are currently being offered gratis by the Bahamas government. This will bring us in line with many other jurisdictions, and revenues generated will assist in underwriting the cost of the Met Department. So, Speaker, there are a number of issues there. I looked at the, just to summarize, the aircraft register, the yacht registry, the lightering, the lighthouses, Speaker. No. The Post Office initiatives, Speaker, and automation to improve the Met Office recovery of costs, and automation to improve efficiency and collection of revenue. Speaker, on the issue of training, Speaker, the member of Golden Gates spoke quite a bit. I was pleased to hear a lot of what he had to say about things that are going to be happening in the public service in a structured way in developing the public service. And training is an area that we have been very concerned with in our ministry, and it's been a focus. And the objective has been to building capacity. And you do it through recruitment and training of new personnel, but you also do it in the development of existing human resources through continuous trainings. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we have sought to place a premium on training. In every area, my ministry's officers have availed themselves of training domestically and all over the world. Training initiatives nationally have been the initiative of my ministry or collaboration with a number of international bodies, such as the Organization of American States, which recently co-sponsored an aviation security course in Nassau for aviation security officers at Family Island Airport. And then the United States Coast Guard co-sponsored with the Port Department an international ship and port security code workshop for stakeholders posted at seaports of entry in our country. The IMO recently sponsored a workshop in Grand Bahama, the first of its kind, which brought together public and private sector stakeholders to discuss issues related to mandatory IMO articles governing the maritime industry. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, extensive training is accessed by large numbers of personnel in the ministry in workshops or training programs offered by the IMO, IKO, or the WMO, as continuous training is critical to building national capacity and to the strengthening of standards. This budget, Speaker, speaks to the issue of training, but it also provides for the engagement of 9 new meteorology trainee officers to build capacity in the Freeport Weather Service, which was recently established by the government. And so, Speaker, you will find that that will be almost a fully developed Met wing of the Met Department. Advertisements will be soon published for the engagement of 10 air traffic controller trainees. That ad should run very soon, a week or two. And young people who are interested can look out for that, because it can be their beginning in a career in air traffic management in our country. Speak on the issue of infrastructure. Major career, yeah. Speaker, critical to our remaining competitive and to improving the quality of life for Bahamians is the state of our infrastructure, which is directly linked to our economic well-being. In this regard, efforts are continuously underway to upgrade and maintain the Prince George Dock, which facilitates millions of cruise passengers annually. Infrastructural, 4 million? 4 million. Infrastructural improvements that are to be undertaken in this fiscal year include surface repairs, causeway repairs, and where appropriate, the repair and/or replacement of bollards. Currently, there is a dredging exercise underway at berths 15 and 16, which will facilitate the berthing of larger vessels, accommodating more passengers. And just a few months ago, Mr. Speaker, the website nassau.cruiseberths.com was launched for the Prince George Dock's online scheduling. This site is accessed by the cruise industry and assists them in the scheduling of their vessels from week to week. And, Mr. Speaker, efforts are underway to create a master plan for the rational operations at Porter's Key Dock. A multi-agency task force comprising government agencies and the private sector has been formed, which has met several times to make recommendations. The management plan will address the issue of berthing at that facility, security, traffic management, and the coordination of the mixed activities of the produce exchange, food vendors, and maritime activities. I wish to thank, Mr. Speaker, all participating members of that task force, but in particular, the Mail Boat Association for their invaluable input and for their assistance in retrieving concrete curbings from the seabed and reinstating them on the dock. You'll do me bad now. Mr. Speaker, You will note funds allocated for dock repairs, and in order to appropriately utilize the expenditure provided for a full audit of the condition of docks nationwide will be undertaken so as to properly prioritize and at worst ensure that repairs will come, if only in a phased manner. Speaker, a review is currently underway to be completed of airports nationwide as to critical indicators. Speak on the issue of solar lights. Emergency solar lights will be installed in the remaining airports, and the lights have been acquired or in the process being acquired, such that all government-owned airports will have the capacity to facilitate at minimum emergency night flights. Speaker, as we speak, I'm advised that the runway construction works are now underway in Mayaguana. I'm advised day two, Mr. Speaker. I'm advised that the base of the runway has begun to be laid, and they're working with approximately 40,000 yards of fill. This process, I'm advised, will take approximately 6 weeks, with the final paving taking 3 to 4 weeks. Mr. Speaker, for the further avoidance of confusion, as I've heard in the media all kinds of versions on the matter of the emergency lights in Mayaguana. Speaker, I want to explain what is happening here. I'm able to advise that because the runway is an active construction site, permanent lights could not be installed immediately. Consequently, more than 2 weeks ago, temporary solar lights were shipped to Mayaguana under the management of the police, thereby giving the Mayaguana airport the capacity to facilitate emergency night flights right now. And Speaker, I've waited for this opportunity because I've read the different versions, and for some reason it just, right now, tonight. We hope that won't be necessary, though.
No, we don't go like that. Not tonight.
So let me just repeat that, Speaker. There are emergency lights in Mayaguana right now. They're temporary lights. And what happens is that when they are needed to be utilized, because the runway is being constructed, the police manage the placement of those lights to facilitate, the solar lights, to facilitate a landing. And that was the best we could do in the circumstances because in the case of an emergency only, Speaker. Solar. And the battery too, they're battery, but the solar, yeah. Right. Speaker, permanent lights have been purchased, however. Solar lights, emergency lights, night flying lights, and they will be delivered and to be installed on what's expected to be a completed runway by late August. And I have obtained permission from the member of Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador to say, the minister responsible for Bahamas Air, that on completion of this runway in Mayaguana, Bahamas Air flights will resume to Mayaguana, Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead, BD.
Thank you, Mr. President. Affectionately known as BD. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, Brave Davis, that is. Mr. Speaker, remedial works are to be undertaken in the General Post Office building in East Hill Street. But in the interim, my ministry is in dialogue with the Ministry of Public Works, and the member is here from Golden Gates. We're in talks with the minister for the temporary relocation of post office staff, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to improve our forecasting ability and to provide information for research, the Met Department is acquiring, as part of the European Union's support to the Global Change Alliance, 5 automatic weather reporting stations on 5 family islands by the end of June. Speaker, that will help us in our forecasting ability. Speaker, the new Marsh Harbor International Airport completion date has been pushed back to the end of August, as advised by the Minister of Works, as works continue at that facility as we speak. Staff is now being engaged in various areas, including air traffic controllers and security officers. The airport will be transferred to the Airport Authority after an amendment to the Airport Authority Act has been passed in Parliament. Speaker, notice was published several weeks ago, and some of you may have seen it, proof is in the pudding, of the government's intention to invite proposals for the private management of the Marsh Harbor Airport. And an RFP is to be released on Friday of this week, inviting proposals for the commercial management of that airport. Speaker, this enterprise is being reserved for a Bahamian group. Already the ministry has received expressions of interest, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, on the other airports, I have engaged in preliminary dialogue with an airport planning firm. We met last week with regards to Bimini International Airport, Arthurstown, it's Arthurstown, right? BD? Arthurstown, and make sure it's Arthurstown, Morristown, North Eleuthera, for the redevelopment of those airports, as the economies of those islands are expected to get significant boosts from projects underway in their communities. And Mr. Speaker, screening equipment has been acquired and is expected to be delivered shortly, in July actually, next month, for installation in Morristown, Exuma, San Salvador, North Eleuthera, Governor's Harbor, Great Harbor Key, Stella Maris, and Bimini, Speaker, and that's for July. And this is all part of our putting in place standards, Mr. Speaker. It's a continuous journey, and it's a non-stop effort, but we are moving aggressively forward. Speaking, the Linden-Pindling International Airport is in its final phase and is set to be completed in October, finalizing what has been a work in progress since we last held office.
Yes, sir.
Speaker, only because the member for Montague mentioned it, I wouldn't get into this, scrap about the issue, but I'm going to be quite brutal. I'm going to be quite brutal. The record of the prior administration in that airport, our main gateway, has not been stellar. In fact, we were downgraded under their watch from a Category 1 airport to Category 2. And I only do this because the member for Montague was not engaging in the blame game, and I'm responding to that non-engagement, Mr. Speaker. And where the runway 1432, and it ended up being repaired when we took office at a cost of $40 million. But that runway was deteriorating. It was described as a disaster waiting to happen, and there was a concern that the engines of a British Airways jet would ingest materials from the runway. I mean, it was that serious. We could talk about it now because it's no longer relevant. But, that is the condition we met that airport in. Yes, we did rename the airport. Renaming was not a small act. It was a major act because we named it after someone who is a hero in our country. So, and to be honest, Mr. Speaker, the opposition boycotted that renaming. They said the invitations came late. Sad, Mr. Speaker. Such a major event in our national history became a divisive, bitter, small event, attempted small event on the part of the then opposition.
Member for Angleston, the member for East Grand Bahama, members, all members. The member for East Grand Bahama, did you rise on a point of order?
I just wanted to clarify real quick that, it wasn't that there was a boycott of that airport, at least certainly not by this member. No, for the opening of the airport, the naming of the airport? For the naming of the airport?
Very well. Member for Angleston,
It's new. I'm talking about the opposition that was then comprised at that time, Speaker. They didn't come, not one of them, not one, Mr. Speaker.
No, not one.
No, not one, Mr. Speaker.
No, not one.
So, Mr. Speaker, the renaming of the airport was a significant act, and but it was only one part of it. The runway redevelopment was a multifaceted approach. It was the repair of that runway, which was $40 million, which was a disaster waiting to happen. It was stressful. It was fearful to know what we had inherited, the neglect associated with it. And the next the next step we did, Mr. Speaker, was that we decided that we would need a management team to revitalize that airport. And the requests for proposals were done, and there were Bahamian companies that submitted. and companies all over the world, Africa, everywhere, Europe, Germany, everywhere. But ultimately, we determined, we went and looked at airports all over the place, everywhere, and saw the different genres of airports. It was the Vancouver, the YVRAS, now Vancouver Airport Group, which was ultimately selected. When we went to their airport, they had what they call this sense of place, which was where they integrated the culture of Canada and the Eskimos, or Inuits as they call them, into their airport design. And they also had pre-clearance. They had a relationship with the Americans on pre-clearance. And so after a very lengthy process and very transparent and scrutinizing process, an impressive committee had been appointed and accountants were involved, we had legal advice, a firm was selected. That firm with us struck an agreement for the construction of the airport, and it was agreed they would be project managers of the construction. Then we lost office, Mr. Speaker.
And y'all continue.
And the administration that came afterwards found a stable airport environment, unlike what we found, a stable airport environment from which they were able to move progressively. And we hope that when we leave, whenever that will be, that those who come afterwards will have a stable environment, not a destabilized environment. So while we're not pointing fingers, I want to just point that out, Mr. Speaker. But the airport is completing. Speaker, at the end of this month, the Bahamas government will assume control of air traffic services at the Grand Bahama International Airport. Offers of employment have been made to the entire complement of staff of air traffic controllers.
Take care of people. Take care of people.
And information technologists and electronic technicians. And there will be no job loss as a result of this transition, Speaker.
Take care of the people.
And Speaker, this transition will come the 1st of July, and we're ready.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Speaker, plans are in motion for the creation of a civil aviation authority and the establishment of an accident investigations bureau. This structural change will create a greater degree of transparency in regulatory oversight and accident investigation. Tenders have been submitted already for consultancies for legal services and administrative and human resources advice, and are currently being reviewed. It is expected by September 2014, both the Civil Aviation Authority and the Accident Investigations Bureau will be established and functioning. And, Mr. Speaker, the new $14 million radar is expected to be installed by December of 2014. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the work towards the creation of a maritime policy is progressing rapidly. And I know when I first spoke about that in this House, there was some of you saying, yeah, blah, blah. But, Mr. Speaker, I had indicated at the time my ministry's intention to spearhead the development of this policy. Since that time, we obtained free of charge a consultancy from the Commonwealth Secretariat. The objective of the policy, Mr. Speaker, is to create an integrated policy which will ensure the main objectives of economic development are achieved, but also to safeguard the natural environment and provide for the sustainable development of our marine space. So it's that three-pronged approach, Mr. Speaker. A few months ago, 2 consultants visited the Bahamas and engaged a number of stakeholders. As a follow-up, there will be held a 2-day workshop in Grand Bahama on the 23rd and 24th of June of this next week or week after, in Abaco for 1 day on the 25th of June, and in Nassau on the 26th and 27th of June, to determine what spatial data is available for our marine space. This is vital information in the development of this policy, Mr. Speaker. And when this policy is completed, it will create a framework that is rational, that makes us understand what the possibilities are for this vital resource that we have in abundance, Mr. Speaker. And it includes energy, science and technology, fisheries, etc., etc. Speaker, I hope you will see, and the Bahamian people will see, that the team at the Ministry of Transport and Aviation has worked very hard, All hands are on deck, and everyone is working hard and working together for a common objective. I am certain that we have diverse political affiliations. I'm sure of that. But this has been, as far as I can see, of no relevance as we engage in the collective work on behalf of the people of this country that we all serve. I take this opportunity to thank the Minister of State, who is of my political affiliation. I'm sure of that, but I'm sure no one else. And then the Permanent Secretary and senior personnel of the ministry and the various departments and the entire staff, including our receptionists, who are outstanding, and our janitresses, who are excellent, for the hard work and the aggressive pace they have kept on a sustained basis, and proving themselves to be a highly committed and productive team. Yeah. Speaker, I will end as I began. We have gone through a hard and harsh period which continues to have lingering effects. It has been rough, horrible. Speaker, this has been accompanied by a number of other challenges, but most especially the issue that the member for Montague spoke at length, a surge of violent crime in our country over the last several years. Speaker, I know that today we are all concerned, but it is incumbent on all of us now to step up to the plate, Mr. Speaker. We must, even in the face of these horrible challenges, stay focused on who we are as a people. Don't lose sight of who we are, Mr. Speaker. We're not a lawless society. We are good people, Mr. Speaker. And we must work even harder, exercise the greatest degree of discipline, and continue to move forward the original dream for the Bahamas. Speaker, my attraction to the ideology of the Progressive Liberal Party has been to the ideological thrust for equity and fairness in our society. The fundamental belief that we are a great country with a good people, and our human capital is a tremendous store of potential in almost every sphere of endeavor. Speaker, my draw to the PLP and indeed public service has come from a shared understanding that the duty of governance is first to protect the weak, and that the Bahamas must be first and foremost a place where the dreams and expectations of our children can be fulfilled, a place where our children would never again be relegated to second-class citizens in their own country, frustrated in their aspirations, Mr. Speaker. I subscribe to the PLP because of its strong, pure, ideological underpinnings, and because of this ideology, policy is purposeful and driven by principle, Speaker. And Speaker, I think someone called us dreamers. Yes, we have dreams, in all kinds of dreams, Mr. Speaker. But we have dreams to remember, Speaker, and those dreams to remember are the founding and building of a modern Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. And 40 years of independence causes us to remember that we do have a history of concrete achievements, Mr. Speaker, concrete achievements. And it was the dreams of our forefathers that brought about those concrete achievements, all the things we take for granted right now. The unemployment benefit that the opposition brags about, comes from an NIB foundation in 1973 or 72, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, and just only because no one's pointing fingers over there, just want to say that it was the Progressive Liberal Party that really led the charge for majority rule, independence, and the founding of the modern Bahamas. It's historical fact. It's historical fact, Mr. Speaker. It is unchanging, Mr. Speaker. So yes, it is dreams, but it's the dreams of our forefathers. As the PM says, the first blow struck for freedom in our country. That is the roots of the dream of what we see manifest now. Speaker, I end with this, and I reiterate, we have a good country. Let us work together for the common good. Thank you, Speaker.
Honorable members, honorable members, honorable members, honorable members. Thank you, honorable member. As many As many, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Yamacraw. The member yields. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Baines and Grandstown.
Mr. Speaker, this is a high note on the tree. A high note on the tree, and tonight it shows that we have repented from the depths to which we had fallen a little earlier tonight.
Yeah,
we thank the member for elevating us on our way home. Mr. Speaker, we would wish now to suspend House until 10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 12th of June.
Second.
Thank you, honourable members. It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House suspends until the 12th of June at 10 a.m. in the year of our Lord 2013. As many are in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. The business of this House suspends until 10 a.m. tomorrow, June 12th.
All right. 26 p.m. 26:27. Huh? 26:27.
Well, that ends this evening's session. Lively, at some point, the Speaker having to not only stand to his feet, but to suspend operations this evening, involving the member for Montague, who was presenting at that time, intervention of the Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Perry Christie, and of course Long Island and West Grand Bahama and Bimini also getting involved tonight. Anyway, some highlights from this evening. BAIC, the chairman, Mount Moriah's Arnold Forbes, says there's going to be a special unit to market farmers and farming, because he said that's been one of the biggest problems. 2 new markets in New Providence to be established, as well as a greenhouse at the government high school and some experimental initiatives over there. A national training agency. June 28th, it will be opened. It's going to be situated down at Gladstone and Munnings Road. Agatha Marcel, the former member of Parliament for South Beach, is going to be the director. The Minister of Labor saying that they expect eventually to have an annual graduation rate of some 3,000 to 4,000. As he said, there's no sense in having all these projects on the books and Bahamians not being able to take advantage of the jobs. That training, by the way, to be certified by City and Guilds. The JL Center down there on Blake Road, the center of much controversy, should be occupied this year. Also, the public service going to get electronic systems so that they can get rid of some of that paper. Also, each ministry, the plan is for each ministry to have a training unit, which should reduce the cost of sending out for training. Also, there is a staff audit going on in the public service. And while he's talking about that, the minister says there are hundreds of employees still waiting to be confirmed in the public service. And there's going to be the movement of some ministries and departments like statistics and the post office and road traffic. As he said, you know, the public service, they need to be comfortable performing their duties. And so they're going to do that. The Rodney Bain building that's been, well, it's been condemned. People have just left it there for the longest time. It is going to be refurbished. Also, crime, the member for Montague spent the first 15 minutes or so of his presentation talking about crime and conch, and eventually during his presentation, as I said, there was that suspension of the House. Also, the initiatives, some of them coming from the Ministry of Transport, aircraft registry, a yacht registry in Grand Bahama, and many others. Works at the Lyndon Pinling International Airport expect to be completed by the end of this year, as well as the radar down there should be installed by September the 24th. Some more highways in Grand Bahama, air traffic controller trainees among those who will be hired down there, and the Minister of Transport and Aviation says through all of this, she also, meaning the Honorable Glenys Hanna Martin, had something to say about crime as well. And she says, you know, you recognize that when the PLP came to office, they had to deal with what was already a burgeoning crime problem. But she says we must remember that we are not a lawless people. That should always be topmost in our minds. And so, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, the member for Yamacraw, Minister of Social Services, Melanie Griffin, will take the floor. And so, on behalf of the entire team here at the Parliamentary Channel, I'm Anthony Newbold. Have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow morning.